the Soviet Union, the previous Soviet Union, had purportedly a large biological weapon research facility and manufacturing facility in what is the current nation of Kazakhstan, where tens of thousands of people, Russians, supposedly were hired to do biological weapon research and development, i.e., and manufacturing and testing and so on and so forth. Naturally, after the fall of the Soviet Union, there were worries about what will happen to those scientists, what's going to happen to those pathogens which were stored there. So the U.S. got involved, working with the Russian government and other officials in Kazakhstan to secure and control that stuff. Whether or not that was all done appropriately in the 1990s and early 2000s, who knows? Okay, but that's another story. But the point, is that all of that research seems to have been more or less isolated to that territory, or what is now Kazakhstan. Now, in 2005, the United States, or some officials from the United States, including Senator Sam Nunn of Georgia, Senator Richard Lugar or Dick Lugar from Indiana, and a few others, worked with the government of Ukraine to create a treaty to secure pathogens and other weapons of mass destruction, which would include biological weapons, in Ukraine. And then after that, you can find discussion openly about the possibility that there may be some storage of these pathogens in Ukraine. But before that, you can't find that. I stress that because if there now, yes, there were some Ukrainian citizens who were scientists involved in the research and development of biological weapons in the Soviet Union. But
for every country, there were, in every country that's doing,
of course,
and especially in the United States and Canada, you have scientists from all over the world.
Of course. Every country has a certain percentage of capable scientists, right? Some perhaps a few more, if the schools were there. So of course there were going to be some Ukrainians involved in that. But Ukraine itself, and I stress this because this opens the door to the possibility that there was no biological weapons program or storage facilities in Ukraine before the treaty, which means all of those storage locations, research facilities, etc., are tied in somehow or another to the U.S. government afterwards. So it's quite a sham to say the U.S. needs to be there because we need to protect the pathogens where we find them and all this other nonsense. That adds to very negative optics of the situation. Again, is Russia right to be worried about a biological weapon attack being staged out of the Ukraine with the funding of the United States or NATO against Russia? I don't know. Okay. But it clearly looks terrible. The optics are awful. So at the very least, you have to give us that. And that would mean that actions taken by the United States government or State Department or whatever have actually led to this conflict. And they have to at some point admit that, okay, and not commit those errors again. All right. So with that said, we have been looking at various United States companies which have been used as subcontractors to fulfill lab development, training, equipment being provided to these laboratories, and other channels and researchers have also covered some of these facilities. One of them, or U.S. contractors, one of them was a company called Black & Veatch, which is in Kansas or Oklahoma, which mostly does a lot of good work. They also have a strength in providing facilities which can be used for dangerous pathogen or dangerous chemical containment, which has a lot of practical purposes, but they've been used as a subcontractor. Doesn't mean anything they're necessarily doing anything nefarious, but that their capabilities would have been used to fulfill some of these contracts. And one of the companies that they've outsourced some work to Another U.S. company is called Metabiota, Metabiota. Now, the company Metabiota has received some visibility in the news because this is a company, U.S.-based company, which has headquarters in San Francisco and Washington, D.C. They were created around 2009, 2010, and they had a lot of initial seed money provided by the sons of former Secretary of State and U.S. Senator Kerry of Massachusetts, as well as the son of the current U.S. President, President Joe Biden, who formerly Senator of Delaware and head of the Foreign Relations Committee or Subcommittee in the U.S. Senate, which is a very powerful role. So, as this company Metabiota has this involvement in Ukraine, you could see potential conflicts of interests, or maybe even being part of these mistakes, which have led to escalations within Ukraine. And again, it's possible that things in Ukraine are actually much worse than just looking bad. Some of the evidence looks horrible with respect to there's actual paperwork and contracts about collecting blood samples, which are specifically Russian Caucasians. And I don't know, I can't think of any good explanation for that. There is no good explanation for that. So my restraint here is not to say that I'm not. I say restraint. I'm just trying to be respectfully restrained in my position. Yes.
In our last episode, didn't you mention that that was a State Department document that specifically requested Russian Caucasian blood samples?
I'm not sure if it's a United States State Department or not. I'll have to review that, but it did come somewhere within the U.S. government that very specifically, yes, Caucasians, Russians. There's a lot of mixed ancestry in Russia, because it's such a large empire. There's a lot of Asian ancestry in there, and similar to the U.S., right? Like, what does it mean to be Russian? Well, some places are more pure, I guess, Caucasian, but like the United States, what does it mean to be an American? Well, I don't know. And we tend to be quite mixed, actually. Everything's an ish in the United States. Let's see here. So that's why we've been reviewing this company, Metabiota, because of those potential conflicts of interests and involvement in fulfilling these contracts in Ukraine. And the Metabiota employees at Metabiota have had other connections to what is clearly sounds like biological weapons research, at the very least in the nations of Georgia, and various officials involved with some of the research of some of the response to COVID-19 as well. Again, the conflicts of interest start to mount up. Now, instead of just looking at the current situation, what I tend to do on my channel and part of my research is I go back a few years and keep going back as far as necessary to start to find patterns as far as what was the founding? When was Metabiota created? Who created it? What other events have they been involved in? And one of the main events that they were involved in was the identification of and the assistance in the response to the outbreak of the Ebola virus in Western Africa, starting in 2013 and ending around 2016. By the end of that breakout or epidemic of Ebola virus, I think the total death toll was around 11 to 13,000 people, with many other cases involved. Metabiota was a very big part of the overall response strategy to that, and trying to determine what areas had more outbreaks in those nations. It should be noted that after the fact, after that outbreak had been winding down, Metabiota actually took a pretty fair amount of heat in mainstream U.S. newspapers and media as having made mistakes in the response to that. It's odd that a company which right now seems to be so we're told by mainstream media to trust at that time had a very unfavorable rating with respect to the response to that Ebola outbreak. Their founder is a still relatively young fellow, meaning 50 or so, about it's like 50, 51 years old, named Nathan Wolfe, WOLFE. He created Metabiota in 2010 or so, and up to the let's see here. And what we've done is I'm trying to work on my flow here. So we've looked at the individuals who were involved in the creation of this company, Metabiota, as opposed to just looking at the fact that, oh, they got some money from the Bidens. All right. Well, they got seed money from elsewhere also. So let's just not look at this as a Biden and son of President, former Secretary of State Kerry thing. Okay. So the roots of Metabiota really go back. If you look at their founder, Nathan Wolfe, to the really, I would say around the year 2000. If you want to go to the W's and click on Wolfe, WOLFE.
Yeah, I was trying to find them in here.
Okay. Yeah, maybe every once in a while I just click on the W. What happens is there's a limitation on Google sites where I can't put all the things in the drop-down menu up on top. Yeah, if you just go to the full screen.
This one right here?
Is it WOLFE? Nathan Wolfe? It's a little small on my end on my iPad. I can't quite see. Yep, there you go.
Okay, just make sure this is the right one.
Yep, born 1970. Yep, he's about 2.5 years younger than me. Is Nathan Wolfe was he's a Michigan kid. Went to Stanford and Harvard. Around the years 1999 or so, he was started to work with a group of zoologists called who have ultimately became part of EcoHealth Alliance. EcoHealth Alliance, for those of you who don't know, is a nonprofit. What's the best way to describe it? Institute based out of New York City, connected to a lot of the wildlife preservation, the Wildlife Preservation Society or Conservation Society, if you will. They've had a lot of connections to the large zoos. They've been responsible for zoo management, staffing, etc. But they've been used as an institute to help fulfill research of various wildlife concerns as well as vaccine research, and they are used as to help institutes such as the United States government in fulfilling certain contracts. Now, a young Nathan Wolfe, 1999, 2000 or so, starts to work with this group of people who eventually also found this EcoHealth Alliance. EcoHealth Alliance has attained notoriety, spoken of right now, or not right now, but over the last couple of years, even in the United States Congress, as potentially having some involvement in the outbreak of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 in the first place. EcoHealth Alliance Vice President of Dr. Peter Daszak was working with Anthony Fauci and others in the United States Health Institutes to help fulfill research contracts related to bat-borne coronaviruses and other things which sound oddly close to what might have been the root of SARS-CoV-2 and ultimately leading to COVID-19. And Peter Daszak was in the Wuhan area in November of 2019, when supposedly SARS-CoV-2 was breaking out, and also did a lot of work with the laboratory in Wuhan. This Peter Daszak, Vice President of EcoHealth Alliance, which Nathan Wolf, Metabiota did a lot of work with. Okay, this Peter Daszak is also one of the lead researchers with the World Health Organization in researching zoonotic events, such as the breakout of SARS-CoV-2. Peter Daszak is actually considered to be the United States lead representative within the World Health Organization to research the roots of coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. The U.S. lead. Now, Peter Daszak, while he might have U.S. citizenship, didn't come to the United States until 1999. As a matter of fact, his ancestry is British and Ukrainian.
Why did that not surprise me?
Yes. His father, the footprint looks as though his father might have actually been recruited into the U.S. military, into the Nazi military in World War II. There were a lot of 18 to 20-year-olds, and George Webb just covered this previously, in the area of Europe, Central Europe, called Galicia, saying, look, you could join us, or you could dig a hole, You know what? I would have joined too if those were my options. I don't hold the horrible options given to most people in the time of war against them. But it does appear as though after World War II, he was given refuge in Britain, offered a fair amount of, resources. His children went, including Peter Daszak, went to good private schools in England, etc. All right. So another tie back to Ukraine. So Metabiota, Ukraine war, Nathan Wolf is what we're trying to get at here. And as I mentioned a little while ago, Metabiota had a huge role in this Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2013 to 2016. And that makes me start to review all of the outbreaks of Ebola in Africa, starting even before then. Now, the very first link that I sent you, and my links for today's show, it's 1.8 Kilbourne Ebola outbreak 2002. Okay, hopefully the link will bring you to the right spot. Oh, gosh darn it! I have the yeah, that's got to go down a little bit further. The Google site supposedly has the ability to give you a link that will bring you to a certain point in the page, and I've been trying to use this successfully, and it doesn't.
This is right.
Yeah. Go down a little bit further. It's actually 2003. I think the article is like March or February. A little bit further. There
it is.
A little bit further. Maybe it's from Science. There it is. Excellent. April. Yep. 2003 April. Okay. The article is from the American, is it AAS? What's that? American Association of Science. I think they make Science magazine. And the title of it is Double Jeopardy of African Apes. The picture is of as of that time, even the late Dr. Annalisa Kilbourne. Now, I found this article because this is the first big outbreak of Ebola, like really notable, that breaks into. There were other outbreaks of Ebola and Marburg virus in Africa before this, but there was one that involved, I think, almost 100 or so people were killed in the nations of Cameroon and Gabon in 2002. Okay, now Metabiota was not yet created at this time. But I started researching who was commenting on, who was representing the United States in these earlier outbreaks of Ebola going back to 2002. Which scientists, which institutions were having hearings in Congress or responding to things like this, to these journal articles. Now, one of them was one of the scientists who tends to come up quite frequently in a lot of these articles is a Dr. William Koresh. And William Koresh is actually the founder of EcoHealth Alliance. And he is frequently popping up in a lot of these articles. William Koresh worked very closely with this Dr. Annalisa Kilborn for several years before she died on November 2nd, 2002, in a plane crash in Gabon, which is one of the countries that had that Ebola outbreak starting in late 2001 and 2002. So going through these articles, I noticed there's three names that tended to come up. One of them is William Koresh, who's the founder of EcoHealth Alliance. Vice president was Peter Daszak. As a matter of fact, William Koresh and Peter Daszak started working together all the way back in the year 2000. It's possible that Annalisa Kilborn also worked with Peter Daszak as well before she passed. This article specifically here, it's not a very long article if you go down a little bit. In one of the last paragraphs, it mentions a Dr. Gary Nabel, Nabel. His name comes up a lot. Gary Nabel, by this time, had already reached a pretty high level of notoriety within the U.S. virology, immunology research community. He was very close with Dr. Fauci by this time. And he was chosen by Dr. Anthony Fauci, president of the National Institutes of Allergies, Infectious Diseases, the NIAID, to be the first person to run a new institute within the NIAID that Fauci created in 1997 called the Vaccine Research Institute or Center. So a whole nother institute within the NIAID to help the private-public partnership between the NIAID and other divisions within the U.S. government and corporations to explore and expedite, of course, vaccine research. And Gary Nabel, in this article here, is mentioned because, of course, he's so concerned about this terrible outbreak of Ebola in Gabon, and talking about how this is yet another example about how we need to find ways to expedite vaccine development and research. And then you have William Koresh as well, also mentioned in a lot of these articles. Now, the other person that is mentioned with respect to this Ebola outbreak, in addition to Gary Nabel frequently and William Koresh, founder of EcoHealth Alliance, is a Dr. Sina Bavari. Sina Bavari, that's Bavari, has worked at USAMRIID, that's the United States Army, U.S.
Diseases.
Yeah, I always try to get the acronym just right. Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, yes, and has been their scientific director for a very long time, up until August of 2019. And Sina Bavari was involved as their lead scientist in the U.S. military at USAMRIID for both for the Ebola outbreak in 2014-15, working directly with Metabiota at that time, as a fact, and testing medicines for the Ebola outbreak all the way back in 2002. So it's the same few people that seem to keep popping up over and over again. Now, there's a lot of stuff I've been dropping on this audience here, and I don't make any attempt to try to tell, to dumb it down, okay? The simple story, by the way, if anyone is really curious, is that there's a few psychopaths running the world right now that view all of humanity as cattle to test vaccines on and run genetic experimentation on. That's the long and short of it, okay? After that, that's the simplest story I can tell. And then after that, you have 1,000 names to learn to know the rest of the story. There's no middle ground here. It's a really simple story, and then it gets super complicated. But that's the simple story is that. And these scientists use every single opportunity as an excuse to say, well, now we need to, this is another reason why we need to expedite vaccines. Vaccine development. This is another reason why we need to take chances. This is another reason why we need to get find ways to do the testing faster, because the stakes are just too high.
Just like with the bird flu outbreak, right? That's happening.
Oh, just like with COVID. Oh my goodness, we don't have time. Too many people are we can't test this on animals. We can't do limited human experiments. We can't. They didn't even do challenge experiments A challenge experiment is when, in addition to getting the vaccine, you actually are exposed to the virus that supposedly the vaccine protects you from. I don't know how they did this, but when they say they tested a vaccine, did you know this, Tyrone? When they test a vaccine and they say it's effective, that doesn't mean they even tested it against the pathogen.
What? So what is it supposed to mean then?
It just means you didn't die when taking the vaccine. Or they sense that it's sort of like saying, this plane is 100% effective because it doesn't blow up at the gate. It really is like that. It's the same thing. It doesn't mean we actually tested flying the plane.
Well,
It's 100% effective because you get on it and it doesn't blow up. It's sort of like that's the vac. It's 100% effective vaccine. Have you challenged people with the pathogen? Well, no.
Well, I'm sure you've heard the meme that all the ferrets died, right? Because they actually did try that, and they gave the vaccine to the. Well, it had got the vaccine, but then they gave it COVID, and all the ferrets died. So
I'm not surprised. But how did they get? How were they challenged with COVID? Also, there's most people would be presented. The natural way someone would be presented with COVID with SARS-CoV-2 is, I guess, airborne. Maybe something in food is another possibility. So when they challenge these ferrets, they inject them with COVID. It's one thing to sit next to someone who's sneezing, right? But when you sit next to someone, and let's say on a bus that's sneezing, they don't stick a needle into their arm and then inject you with it. That's the way they challenge people with these. That's like, whoa, I'd never get on the bus if that's what's going on. But that's again, it doesn't make any sense. If it's a respiratory virus, guess what? It's going to enter through the lungs. It doesn't enter with a needle. But they challenge animals in all these backwards ways, which doesn't really correspond to what we're told is the fear or the thing which we should be worried about. So this is a long roundabout thing about all of this stuff, all of these things that leading up to Ukraine. So we've been studying the companies, the subcontractors which have been involved. We're looking at the scientists, and there's a lot of scientists. And why are there so many scientists and directors and everything else? Because more money has been spent on vaccine development and genetic research, I think, than the space program at this point.
It's close. It's very close.
It's very close. It's possibly more, and it's hidden. All right, like one day you'll watch Fauci, and he'll be like, we've only spent $40 million on HIV here, and it's like, okay, so one institute for 1 year maybe spent, I don't know, 40 million, right? And it sounds terrible, but then you realize, there's 1,000 colleges that all got 20 million each. There's every branch of the U.S. government has their own vaccine research. There's all these other different departments doing work. So yeah, you could find one department that maybe 1 year doesn't sound like much, but the cumulative spending is ginormous. Okay, it's almost incalculable. Plus, Merck Corporation, other big companies, they're doing their own research as well. Granted, they take every penny they can get, free stuff from the government, but and non-government organizations as well. But the spending is ginormous. If you really just look at it across, corporations, non-government organizations, the government, etc., it's huge. It's huge.
If you go back to 2003 and look at all the agencies, all the health departments that receive government funding, all the biology departments that receive government funding from the state or the federal government, it's well over today's equivalent of the 1972 equivalent of $15 billion.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure it's and again, a lot of it's buried, right? It doesn't say genetic research. There's a lot of investment in computing, which doesn't show, it was genetic research, yet one of the main reasons that DARPA was behind networking a lot of computers, which ultimately led to the creation of the internet, was because they needed more storage and more compute power do a DNA analysis than they had at any one college back at the time. Again, another program which doesn't present itself as part of this project, but in reality was motivated by this. So reeling it back here, Gary Nable's hardly a household name. He's a little bit more well-known in the Boston area because his wife, Elizabeth Nabel, sometimes called just Beth Nabel, Nabel, was actually was on the board of directors of Moderna in early 2000. And there was some, that received some bad press, like a bit of a double standard. And she was encouraged to step down from being on the board of directors of Moderna. She
in the picture, right?
Yep, she was also the director of the I think it was the National Health Institute's blood center or blood bank at one point. I'm not using the right title there. Dr. Gary Nabel, a couple of things there. Yes, he was chosen by Fauci to be the first director of the Vaccine Research Institute in 1997, 1998. He was the president or the director of scientific research at Sanofi. And I know Sanofi has been brought up a lot on your programs, in particular by George Webb. And he also worked in the laboratory of Dr. David Baltimore, who, again, George Webb just talked about in his previous show. Also, Gary Nabel is one of the most frequently found names that pops up when you look at people chosen to comment on the need for more HIV research, as well as overall responses by the United States government to Ebola outbreaks, including the one in 2002, as we just showed, and the one in 2013, 2014, etc. Actually, there he was with Sanofi, so he doesn't show up there as much. So by introducing you to Nabel, and we'll what we can do is we can look at some of the articles. I was actually just going to read through his Wikipedia page as well as his wife, and we have a half-hour presentation if you want to watch it of him speaking in 2003. It's another example, and there's some key articles I really wanted to show about Nabel as well. And if you want to, we can just go straight to those. If you open up my page on Gary Nabel, of him working directly with President Bush and the first director of Homeland Security, Tom Ridge, in the response to September 11th, 2001. Of course, after September 11th, 2001, one of the very first things which is spoken about is those anthrax letters were just so bad. They highlight how vulnerable we are to bioterrorism. And what does that mean? Well, that means that we need to, again, spend more money on vaccines and find more ways to expedite vaccine development and move the testing along quicker because otherwise we're just too at risk to terrorists who are going to commit bioterrorism. And yes, so throughout 2001, the United States government was talking extensively about the worry of being attacked by terrorists using a bioweapon. Then September 11th happened. Then there were the anthrax letters, and they, again, just went right back to focusing 100% on the concern of bioterrorism, then emerging diseases, pathogens, etc. And of course, the only way to prevent it is not more intelligent border security or anything like that, but to find ways to expedite vaccine development and vaccine approval. It always comes back to that. If you ask this guy how to make a ham sandwich, he'll say, my biggest problem is I can't make the vaccines fast enough. It's every single one of these people. What gets in the way of everything. How do I approve the vaccine faster? 2002, this Ebola outbreak. That was the first thing they were talking about. Oh, another Ebola outbreak in Gabon. How are we going to, next time when this happens, approve the vaccine faster? And 20 years later, what happens? We have coronavirus, right? And the very first thing they start talking about is, oh my God, everyone's going to die if we can't get the vaccine approved faster. Oh, thank goodness we have this amazing mRNA technology. We can just print it out. We don't even need to test it anymore because we can verify this stuff on computers, etc., and just start injecting people. Just go for it, man. And it's almost like it's like a 20-year vision finally being achieved. You know, how do we just get people injected with stuff without all that annoying testing? And this is what this has led to. Fear. This is the big thing. Yes, Tyrone.
Go ahead.
I was just saying that fear is how they get people to do it as well.
Fear. That's irrational fear. Yes. There's a lot of healthy debate to be had on what SARS-CoV-2 was, how much of it was, how many people got sick because of vaping products, how many people got sick because of a respiratory illness, how many people were diagnosed as having SARS-CoV-2, but in reality just had the flu. All they needed was some antibiotics, but no. Doctors said they had SARS-CoV-2, and instead they got remdesivir, they got a vent, and then they got a death certificate. We don't know, okay? That is all stuff that needs to be debated and understood. I think many people perished unnecessarily, and it's still happening because of bad diagnoses and wrong medicine. But was this whole thing, if there was some, again, speculation, reason why this whole thing happened, was it really because of they just wanted to test the virus and see if it works? There might have been an element to that. I think the end goal was the vaccine, showing that emergency use authorization works at scale, showing that we can actually use gene therapy methods for medicine going forward. And sure enough, that's exactly what had happened. Whatever was needed to do up front to justify the response, that's what was done. So it doesn't need to have been just any one thing. The response was really the end goal. And you could look at this history of the last 20 years, actually even 25 years. They started talking about this before 9/11. How do we find a way to approve vaccines faster? We can only keep so much stuff in the stockpile. The stuff is going to go bad. The most important thing to protect civilization is to have a way to produce that.
It looks like we lost Mark for a minute. I just want to point out to our subscribers that the Chief Technology Officer for Mode X Therapeutics, with Gary Nabel or Nabel, is Maggie Zhu, who's personally the smartest computational bio that I've ever met, and she was the lowly IT assistant to Jill Stein. So I'm still digging into that, trying to understand the connection. Why does the smartest computational biologist in Boston have to be simultaneously a lowly IT staffer to Jill Stein and the head of Modex Therapeutics?
Am I back on the air?
Yes. You're back. Welcome back.
You know what? I'm not familiar. Could you spend a few minutes, John, and tell me about this scientist, what you know about her?
I'll send you the links right after the show. Her name is Maggie Zhou, Zhou.
Okay.
And that's Joe. I mean, Zhuo.
Zhuo.
Zhou. OU, that's Joe.
Joe.
Like Joe Biden. I'm serious.
No way. All right.
So when we talk about Joe Bio, we have to distinguish which Joe we're talking about.
Which Joe? I mean, they look so similar.
But Maggie Zhou was between 2014 and 2017 the lowly IT staffer to Jill Stein.
Really?
And she's also with Gary Nabel. I don't know if they were at the same time.
Is this the lady?
That
looked like her?
That's close. Let me see the bio. Where did she spend 8 years in Boston?
Apparently, there's a lot of Maggie Joes.
Joe's a fairly common name.
But I do have the website in my laptop, and I'll have to send it to you after the show.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, in fact, the whole topic of computational chemistry is very relevant here because this is a technique which has been leveraged now with the response to SARS-CoV-2 for COVID-19. Because there's just so many therapeutics out there, guys, which are available, which have already been approved by the Food and Drug Administration for other things. This emergency use authorization capability, which exists within the United States, was approved, is available to the Food and Drug Administration, is available if and only if there's a new novel pathogen and none of those other therapeutics work. Well, clearly, it's going to take a while to test all of those. So what they allow now is for the capabilities of computing to be put to use to determine if any of those, that huge library of existing approved medicine might work, might help with people who have COVID-19, who have this infection, the SARS-CoV-2 virus infection. And this again allows an expedite to move things along. So, whereas previously you would have had to throw all this stuff at the wall to see which one works. Now you can just hire a 30-year-old software engineer in Montreal. I'm not even joking. Who went to McGill, who 10 years ago was working at LensCrafters, and you can hire him as a consultant. Okay. And the results that are spat out of that computer program will actually have more weight than 10,000 highly trained, experienced physicians in the United States. And that computer scientists didn't even have to take a Hippocratic oath.
That's a very important point.
Think of how valuable that is. And of course, when they entered the model, the chemical formula for SARS-CoV-2, or the model of it, the very first thing that the program spat out was remdesivir, which had never worked for anything. So this the use of computational chemistry is I'm not opposed to it. I worked in the computer field for 20-something years. I'm totally open to it. But I can see right now how it can be misused. And the biggest opportunity for misuse is computer scientists do not take an oath to do no harm. So while it's an interesting data point, and by the way, how do you even know it prints out the right answer? How do you know? It says remdesivir. How do you know if that's the right answer?
People, then you find out.
I'm sorry?
I said you start putting it in people, then you find out.
Yeah. And or maybe you find just one person and you say they took it and oh my goodness, they got better. Okay, there's another data point.
Like Trump with the I forgot what he took, but he got better immediately after whatever they had gave him. Was it anybody's? They gave him something.
It wasn't monoclonal antibodies. It was he described it as a gift from God, which was not the right, not the best language he could have used there, because it actually does involve an aborted fetus cell line. I forget what it was.
HEK.
Someone in the audience will think of it. All right, so long intro here. Oh my goodness, we're already an hour in. If the audience has any questions about anything I've spoken about so far, feel free to bring it up. So I've mentioned this Gary Nabel, okay, and what led me to discovering Gary Nabel? It was his involvement, one of the top names always mentioned in all of these Ebola responses. And the Ebola response, the big Ebola outbreak in 2014 to 2017, involved almost everyone that we've studied so far. Not just today, but I mean over the last couple of years. It's remarkable how many people were part of the response to that epidemic. Of course, there's Fauci, but then there's Gary Nabel at with Sanofi. There's Julie Gerberding, who at that time was just became a vice president at Merck Corporation. She was the first female director of the CDC. There was the vaccine candidates, which were produced out of Canada, Francis Plummer, etc. Heinz Feldman was a big part of that response, and I could think of probably 100 other names. But this Gary Nabel's name just keeps kind of popping up as a big candidate, and of course his wife was a director, or a board member, lead board member, anyways, at Moderna, which ultimately was one of the top vaccines chosen by the United States government. And the fact that Gary Nabel had worked with Koresh and others, and Peter Daszak actually, all the way back in 2002, always commenting on this, on what was happening in Gabon and Cameroon about the Ebola outbreak back then. And it always went back to, of course, commenting on the new therapies that they were trying out for people who had Ebola at that time. But also, more importantly, this reminder of how it was happening because of bushmeat. That Ebola outbreak was happening in that area of Africa because of food not being cooked, because hunters were being bitten by animals that were rabid. It's just always this constant reminder of how new diseases are happening because of human interaction with animals, because of pushing deeper into the forest with respect to development and mining, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the many of the people that we have spoken about has been part of our research that have been spoken about by the United States Congress with respect to the outbreak of SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus, such as Peter Daszak, again, tied up with this EcoHealth Alliance, which of course helps facilitate or fulfill contracts for research, but also a lot of talk about zoonosis. And zoonosis is this whole topic of pathogens moving from animals to people, or possibly from peoples to animals, and how we are more and more at risk of new diseases because of the changing relationship between, or the tightening of this relationship and interaction between people and animals. And of course, there's only one way to solve that, which is more vaccines and faster vaccines. It's the same answer again. It always comes up, whether it's the terrorists with the turbans, whether it's the bush meat hunters, whether it's the as you probably have watched some of the National Geographic shows, it's the deer hunter in Minnesota that just wants to eat the larynx out of a deer. Whatever it is, right? It's the only solution. The only solution is expedited vaccine research and development.
Mark, they have not yet proposed new and faster vaccines as a solution to violent crime in Chicago.
It's only a matter of time. They're looking at faster vaccine development for cancer right now. Cancer moonshot, mRNA and personalized medicine. It's right around it's already been spoken about. Biden has already mentioned it. As a matter of fact, before Trump won the election in November of 2016, Nathan Wolf of this Metabiota company was talking about cancer moonshot and using new vaccine technologies in the war against cancer. Of course, Trump won, Hillary didn't, so it took a backseat for a little while. But guess what? 5 years later, we're right back in that same situation, because that was always the plan. That was always the plan, is to have new vaccine technology to help cure everything. They wanted to. I'm not kidding. Vaccine technology for addiction is being suggested. How can you use vaccines to help cure alcohol and opioid addiction? How about I don't know, teaching someone some better health habits and working on family relationships and practical filling of subscriptions for people who have chronic pain. There's so many other very simple ways which could go a long ways, but no, everything needs to be solved with gene therapy, with new vaccine technology.
And your earlier point about the zoonotic developments, I remember that in 2005, in Italy, we started to see many students being sent to African countries, third world countries in general, the jungles of Southeast Asia, Cambodia, so that they could study, all of these bad germs that Mother Nature was throwing at us, because Mother Nature was really upset with us.
Mother Nature might be pretty upset with us. I don't doubt it. There's a lot of human pollution right now. I don't doubt that at all. But is it coming? Here's the thing: isn't it easy enough to find environmental problems to worry about? Do you have to fabricate things? There's already enough work to do, but that's not the stuff that they want to tackle. EMF pollution. Ignore that. Ignore it. Pretend it isn't even happening. Instead, let's focus on the fact that someone's eating cold bat soup in Wuhan. Let's make stuff up that people need to worry about, instead of looking at the things that are, the fact that your IQ goes down after walking through the laundry detergent aisle. Let's look at other things, and again, cause problems, and then have a solution, which in turn causes even more problems.
Tyrone had a comment about the EMF.
Yes.
I was just going to say, you talk about pollution and EMF. You can now get 4G on Mount Everest. So next time for your next trip, don't forget to bring your cell phone, because you'll get service. At least 4G.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. You can get 4G on Mount Everest now. I'm not sure how far up, but they got it.
Has it really become that easy? I know that it's been getting easier and easier. You can basically just hire a guy in Nepal to carry your stuff up. They'll probably actually carry you up if you give them enough money.
Well, missionaries in Burkina Faso have been begging Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation for pumps, water pumps, and water filtration. The Gates Foundation will not give them the water filtration equipment for $5,000, but they will give a dozen vaccines to all the kids.
Doesn't that tell you everything you need to know, guys?
And this was actually back in 2013.
That should tell you everything you need to know. If you can't afford are either of you more familiar, because you're close to the area, with the Flint water contamination issue?
About the hexavalent chrome?
Yeah, I only know a little bit. I'm out in Massachusetts, right? I don't know. I can't tell what's real and what isn't. But from what I've heard, is there's a lot of young children that have gotten sick from low quality water, and that there's no reason for any American to have that happen to them. Is it really an issue that could have been solved with a few $1 million of infrastructure?
Because didn't they have lead pipes still or something like that? There was lead in the water. There were heavy metals in the water, like so. But yeah,
is that right, John?
Had to tear up a lot of ground, but
so what?
A little costly.
The long term, the time to recover the costs was like 25 years, and that's out of the question nowadays.
Well, they should have did it for the children's sake, for the future's sake.
These children are our future. Literally, these children are our future adults, right? So, I mean, I understand you don't want to spend $50 million for a pipe for one guy that's living on a hill somewhere. I understand. There's you have to be intelligent about it, but this is an area of a city, and children are getting sick. I don't. Again, why is that money not available? But if there's 1 in a million chance of getting a sniffle from COVID, they'll approve a $10,000 vaccine for every child.
Yeah, but the official story on hex chrome, I talked to one of the engineers that actually investigated, did a third-party independent assessment, and he said that the official story about hex chrome was not the whole deal. There's something deeper that he didn't understand. But now you and I and Tyrone can piece that together, as they were getting too much good data from the sick kids.
Meaning the
medical.
Whoa. You mean there was a benefit for of having children being sick for data collection?
more data. These guys love data.
Oh God.
I didn't even think about it like that, but I mean, I guess there is a data point, but I don't know if they'll go that far. Now, this news article says
This
the
is just
government
sick.
lied, and there was I didn't read all the way down to the bottom yet.
Again, I don't know if that's true or not, but you know what? I'm rolling my eyes. I'm rubbing my eyes because I can actually see that being the case.
But it was lead in the water.
Wherever you see Veolia, you think bad things happen.
I don't want to think bad things. Scientists are not like religious figures, but we need to at least have some faith that trying to do the right thing. Oh boy, guys. So, is there an article there to read?
Yeah, if you wanted to hear a little bit about the Flint thing, because this actually is from this year, I think. Yes, from February. And it says LAN officials stayed silent on the need to treat Flint water to make it less corrosive to lead pipes and plumbing, Stearns said. While Veolia knew lead was a problem in the city, water, but failed to warn the public, telling residents instead that their water was safe. Sounds like what they would do anyway, to prevent panic or responsibility. Let's see. They're going to blame everyone else, but they were speeding too.
But it was another divide and conquer strategy.
Basically, they're blaming each other in this article, but
who cares, right? If someone made a mistake, whatever. The point is, fix the darn problem. That's it.
That's what we pay taxes for.
That's what you pay taxes for.
We'd be like, yeah, use our taxes for that. Yeah.
And we're 30 trillion in debt. And we can't fix a few pipes.
I mean, look, we got this big infrastructure bill that Biden could have donated. Just the entire project should have been included in that, since it was such a nationwide thing, and the people need clean water, and it's probably a problem in a whole bunch of other cities that hasn't come up yet. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Well, not to mention, we've basically offered the ability for various financial institutions to basically increase the money supply. I'm not capable of describing exactly how it all works, but there's some I don't know how many trillions of dollars of money has been created because of all of these misdealings over the last few years. You can't just tell someone, print another trillion over there. Really, you've already made 100 trillion. What's 101? And then fulfill this stuff a little more. If there's going to be inflation, anyways, can't you just? I'm not in a position to fully describe the nature of the problem with the Flint thing. Okay, I only referred to it because it's well known. I've been given the impression it's been impacting the health of a lot of children, and I just can't believe the problem isn't being addressed. And it goes back to the article you mentioned earlier about water supplies in some areas in Africa. Again, is the water supply of every village in the world the responsibility of the United States? No. But that said, if you have these non-government organizations with access to billions of dollars in capital, and they don't want to spend $5,000 to give someone clean water, but if it came to a $2,000 shot to reduce acne, they're all over it. What the hell?
Priorities. Well, speaking of priorities, I know this is kind of off topic, but it's
please.
relevant.
Hopefully, the audience you're having a good time, everyone, learning a few things. And
I don't know if you ever been to the White House briefing room online, but it has releases statements from people within the White House.
Okay.
And, they actually have a list of immediate priorities. Let me share this right quick, because the first one kind of scares me. So I'll show you right quick. So the Biden-Harris administration immediate priorities. If you go to the first one, it's COVID-19. It says President Biden will move quickly to contain the COVID-19 crisis by expanding testing, safely reopening schools and businesses, and taking science-driven steps to address the communities, especially communities of color, who have been hardest hit by the virus, and President Biden will launch a national vaccination program to inoculate the U.S. population. I don't like that. I'm basically being targeted for vaccination. It's it's their first priority. So,
aren't we like all in this together? I mean, certainly, no group should be given preference, but
right. It should be all about America. It should be, to protect Americans,
Yeah, I'm glad we're on board with that.
And the next one is climate, but
it's science-based.
Show you that.
Science-based. What is whose science? Is it your science, John?
Not mine.
Is it your science, Tyrone?
They didn't ask my opinion. But Mark, did you want to get into this? I see you have a C-SPAN video.
Yeah, I do. You can play it for, I think Nabel speaks for about half an hour or so. So this is 2003. Sometimes I think it's helpful for me to just shut up and for you to, audience, to listen to the person. Okay. Now, with so many scientists involved, I'm always trying to, reserve my judgment on where each person is coming from. A lot of these movements that we see to push this new medicine, to expedite vaccine approval, the responses to all of these epidemics, a lot of these things, like, no offense, I don't mean this in a mean way towards Dr. Nabel here, okay? But if he was never born, would this still be happening? Probably yes. Okay, so which of these people are just, they're there and it's happening anyways, right? And they're merely just maybe nudging the boat, versus who in this picture is actually actually causing this crap to happen. And that's not always clear, right? Just because someone may be involved at this level, does that mean that they are a bad actor, if you will? Not necessarily. It doesn't mean that you can give them endless benefit of the doubt either. So this is from 2003. This Ebola outbreak, this first one, or the one at this time, anyways, it was just wrapping up. They are, of course, talking about how there's more and more epidemic or pandemics happening because there's more zoonosis. They talk a little bit about West Nile and, of course, HIV. There's a big initiative at this time to have an even bigger coordinated response against HIV. And yes, there are HIV signatures within coronavirus, by the way, everyone. And you can see Nabel, and Nabel's presenting right after who at this time was the director of the CDC, Julie Gerberding. Gerberding,
right here.
Yeah, you can go and start around minute 30, 27 or so. And I just did that because I just want to reinforce that Nabel is at this, Gary Nabel is at this level with Fauci, with Gerberding, and so on and so forth. Now, Julie Gerberding, remember, had became a vice president at Merck Corporation, vice president of vaccine development, just before the 2014 Ebola epidemic. And she personally handled the reception of a prototype Ebola vaccine from Newlink Corporation, almost directly from Robert Malone in 2014 or so, with money coming from the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, the DTRA. Same characters, same people, just keep popping up, and so on and so forth. So Nabel is sort of a soft-spoken fellow. You're not going to be like, whoa, this sounds like another Dr. Pangela. But it just gives you a flavor, okay? And again, you'll hear some language which really leads us to thinking, wow, that's 20 years later, that's kind of what happened. Oh, and they also, of course, use a projection that if they didn't take action, that by now, I think 75 to 100 million people would have died of AIDS. As it turns out, that number, well, fortunately, has been missed by a wide amount. It's lower. It's like 30 million, I think, worldwide. Anyways, I'm going to shut up for a little bit, and let's just listen to Gary Nabel all the way back in 2003. If you can start at minute 28, I think is when he starts talking or so.
So we can address those at the panel discussion. We're delighted to have with us today Dr. Gary J. Nobble, who is the director of the Vaccine Research Center at the National Institutes of Health. And I asked Dr. Nobble to address a very important question that's on all of our minds, and that is, are we closer to an HIV vaccine? Gary?
Looks like an honest fellow.
Thanks, Bill. It's a pleasure to join you all here today. Do I just advance here to escape? Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to pick up on some of the themes that Julie talked about. Clearly, in an era where we've all become much more vulnerable to infectious diseases, I think the value of vaccines are becoming increasingly appreciated. Emerging infectious diseases for biothreats and also for existing pandemics. One of the aims of the center that I work in, the Vaccine Research Center, is to advance the knowledge that we've gained in science towards a very practical application, which is the development of a vaccine. And AIDS, in fact, I think may represent the most pressing need for us today. Despite the fact that we are working in the VRC on many of the diseases that Julie just described to you, a new generation smallpox vaccine. We have products in production for SARS and West Nile virus and others. We really regard our major mission as being that of an HIV vaccine. Why? Because it really, viral pandemic really has exceeded our capacity to contain it. Just to give you a perspective that we carry with us every day in our own work, the number of cases of HIV worldwide per day is about 14,000. That means that every minute there are 10 people that are becoming infected with this virus. And so we regard the urgency with which we approach the development of an AIDS vaccine at either equal or greater than those of other targets that we may hear about more in the press, but really aren't having the same toll on human life. In terms of the progress in HIV vaccines, I'm actually going to start and tell you at the macro level where we are, what the large-scale clinical trials have shown us, and then come back to a more micro level and tell you about some of the scientific problems and approaches that we're taking to overcome the obstacles that HIV has created for us. There have been more than 30 distinct concepts. I'll come back to this idea of a concept for vaccines. That is an idea that a particular strategy will work when we formulate it as part of a vaccine. The number of clinical trials of vaccine candidates, if you include phase 1 trials, actually probably now exceeds more than 100 clinical trials. And to date, more than 12,000 people have been enrolled in various HIV vaccine trials. I think as you've seen more recently, both at the level of the US government, as well as the WHO and UNAIDS, there's certainly more international involvement and recognition that these trials need to be done where the disease has its highest impact. And so I think the international community is beginning to coalesce around this recognition. And finally, there is more public funding for actual vaccine manufacturing, an area that we really left in previous days to the private sector, but clearly the private sector has limited incentives to become involved in HIV vaccine development. You probably have read recently about the results of the VaxGen trial. This has been the first completed phase 3 study of an HIV vaccine. This was actually quite a remarkable feat just to complete this trial, and the VaxGen group deserves much credit for doing this. Unfortunately, when the trial was unblinded and the results were disclosed, what was recognized very quickly is that this vaccine, when looking at primary endpoints, was not effective. Essentially,
So, Mark, what kind of success rates are we seeing here? Could you tell me?
Let's see here. Let's look at this chart. Total, they break it down by men and women, white and black, Hispanic, Asian, other. Let's see here. Vaccine.
Because it says
Trying to look at these numbers.
5.7. So,
yeah, here they're not looking at effectiveness. Here it says trial enrolled. How many men? Overall infection rate 2.7% a year.
So this is they gave these people something, and this percentage actually got HIV. Is what they're trying to say.
Let's see here. I'm trying to understand this
right.
thing as well.
I'm putting you on the spot, Mark, but I just saw.
No, that's fine.
What are they trying to say here?
So here, while white males who I presume, I don't know, yeah, this is all gay men. Okay, so all gay men. Let's see here, or all homosexuals, anyways. So of 4,741 homosexual men that were given the vaccine, looks like 6.3%. I don't know if that means that the vaccine was effective.
I think
in protecting against versus protecting against infection, versus the placebo, which is 5.9%,
which is almost no difference.
Not a big difference. I don't know how they say infection rate is 2.7% a year. What does that mean? I think 2.7% of that population is infected or becomes infected each year. Those are different things. I don't know if it's a compounding 2.7% or if that's an average. So to your point, Tyrone, this is a little confusing. Maybe Dr. I say Nabel. You say tomato. I say tomato. I say Nabel or I say Nabel. But we'll clarify these numbers a little bit, because you're right. It's a little confusing, but without really knowing a whole lot more, those are not big differences in percentages. I would see someone would have a hard time telling me that those are big differences.
It doesn't seem like it would be worth taking it. You know?
Yeah, correct.
But we can continue.
A response rate of 5.7% in vaccine recipients versus 5.8% in placebos. In looking at some of the subset analyses, let me see if I can get the pointer up here, there was some hints that perhaps certain subpopulations might have derived some benefit from the vaccine. But I'd like to point out to you that these are really not considered to be statistically significant, particularly in Blacks and Hispanics and Asians, and in women in particular. It was thought that perhaps there was a slight advantage to this group. But in fact, when you do these numbers, and in fact, if you look...
What is, I will highlight here, I think VaxGen is a, I'll need to, I think it is a vaccine technology that is, I think it's, how would you say, synthetic? Some of these vaccines were just like subunits. So they were just like just the proteins of the virus, or a similar protein to the what one would find on the virus itself were injected, which is sort of like the mRNA vaccine, which is being given to people right now to protect them against SARS-CoV-2, includes instructions or provides instructions to one's body, the recipient's body, to produce proteins which are similar to the spike proteins of SARS-CoV-2. And the hypothesis is that then people will make antibodies to those proteins. I think VaxGen was just the injection of the proteins themselves, with the hope that people would then develop an antibody response to it. Now, what was also being tested at this time were new DNA vaccines, which provided again the recipe for the body to produce the proteins of HIV, and they were testing the same thing with Ebola as well. They seem so different, but time and time again, we see the same people working on the same things, which brings me back to what George had said last week was you need to look at these programs as unified. And I don't understand how they're unified, but it's always the same people working on the same things. But the point here is that this is 2003. They're talking about HIV. They're using the excuse of zoonosis and more pandemics as the motivation for expediting the vaccine research and the vaccine approval process. The technologies are eerily similar to what we're looking at, what was approved and was used, and at least especially in the United States for to help with coronavirus. Except here, coronavirus was mostly mRNA stuff, and here they're looking at subunit as well as DNA vaccines. But nonetheless, it's a new era of vaccine technology that they're talking about. And of course, there's the fact that SARS-CoV-2 magically winds up having proteins with an HIV type signature in them, which there's still no explanation for that in nature. A couple notes about the timing of this event here in 2003. The first SARS virus had just broken out at the end of 2002 and early 2003. So Nabel and others, many others, are all talking about how this SARS thing is so bad, and it's another reason why in the future we're going to need to come up with new vaccines that are expedited. Again, right, repeating that same theory. They had just wrapped up the dealing with the Ebola outbreak in Gabon in 2002, which again, another thing that I'll talk about here or have been speaking about, why we need new vaccine technology, which can be developed faster, and new methods of approving it, getting it into people's arms faster. And especially with respect to the Ebola outbreak, the proof points that came out around that in Gabon and central, was that sub-Saharan Africa, was all of this concerns about zoonosis. And I find it uncomfortable that two people who provided the most evidence of zoonosis during that outbreak. One was Nathan Wolfe, who is the founder and CEO of Metabiota, who we started off talking about. And the other one was Annalisa Kilborn, who died in a plane crash that I can't find a record of. And Nabel will comment that this is, these zoonoses are a bigger problem that we need to be on the lookout for, but he'll never mention her by name. And I find that, that makes me uneasy. So that's what led me to start to focus a little bit more on him. The fact that he kept popping up on all of these articles that would show her picture, would talk about the concerns, but never call her out by name. And I think it was just editorial decisions that wound up including her at all. I don't think Nabel would have brought her up at all.
So
anyways,
like Dr. Gardner, were they just not being mentioned, or maybe it's not Gardner I'm thinking of. There was another scientist that you found that wasn't really being mentioned.
Oh, as a matter of fact, that scientist was Dr. John Wolfe, Wolff, different spelling and no relation to Nathan Wolfe.
Right. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, that's the one is the first name on a research paper produced in 1989 regarding the possibility of using these gene therapy techniques, these transfection techniques, to produce proteins and cause this whole chain of events that would lead to immunization. Okay. And as a matter of fact, you will find Nabel working with that John Wolfe all the way back in 1988, 1999, 1989. So it's odd that Nabel actually worked with him too. I have that that newspaper article. I've saved it. I'm not sure if it's on my website yet or not, though. So that means he's worked with both. Again, also makes me a little that is quite that's quite a coincidence. So please continue to play the video. Thank you. Great questions.
You got it.
This column versus this column, the differences of a couple of cases in either of these groups would likely change the statistical significance very quickly. And factors involved in recruitment and trial design really do not allow us to say with any confidence that any particular subgroup did derive a benefit from the vaccine. Having said that, I think it does highlight the importance as we move forward to make sure that as we recruit into these trials, that we make sure that we get a broad cross-representation of different members of society, different races, different ethnic groups, and male and females as well. Now, having said that, we've really not—
If I may just interject for a moment.
By the way, was
I think we're all on board. I'm not a big fan of singling out, making sure that one group gets a different treatment than other groups. We should all be treated equally. However, it is noteworthy that in this new era of gene therapy, where we are providing DNA and RNA transcriptions, which might be the basis of producing proteins and causing antibodies to be created, and so on and so forth. There's a very good reason to believe that could be racially different responses to these medicines by race because of microscopic differences of DNA. However, that said, it should also be expected that there could be differences by age, by diet, and by gender as well. So in this case, noting the responses, differentiating the responses by race does make could be valuable. So I just wanted to note, when talking about the administration of it, I don't know, that just seems to be someone trying to get political favor. But when noting how different groups respond to it, especially in the era of gene therapy, that's understandable.
All right, and we'll continue.
It's not a great surprise. The particular vaccine candidate that we used is a denatured form of the viral envelope protein normally found on the surface of the virus. And I'll tell you a little bit more about why that's not a surprise as we get into the science of where we're going. The next question is how do we proceed? And one of the points that I'd like to leave you with is that as we're looking forward to developing vaccines for HIV, and this will be true for SARS, West Nile as well, one of the strategies behind vaccine development is to essentially try to mimic the naturally occurring virus as best we can. I'm showing you here in this slide a picture of the AIDS virus infecting a target cell. You can see that this is although it's a fairly simple organism, it really has only 10 gene products. It assembles into a very sophisticated and precise piece of biologic machinery that interacts with very specific proteins in a target cell. And when we extract pieces of proteins or genes from these viruses and attempt to make vaccines, what we have to be mindful of is that we create for the immune system a target that looks like the native virus. The more we isolate pieces and we present them in this very linear fashion, in a very simple fashion, we extract them away from this native structure. And one of the themes that I'll come back to is that we need to try to mimic the structure of the virus in order to elicit an effective immune response that will then neutralize the virus.
This is a good point to pause.
Protection.
So, trying to think of the right way to start this off. What Dr. Nabel did here was he is correlating the presence of the HIV virus with the symptoms of AIDS. In other words, if there is, it's an assumption that's built into what he just stated, right? Meaning, if there is an HIV virus, and there's multiple strains and subtypes of HIV, which he will get into a little bit, that means that there will be AIDS. And the reason why they want to deal with the replication of this HIV virus is because of the disease that it causes. that's something that is I just picked up on this recently. Many of these scientists always jump to that. Like, if you can test for the presence of a virus, all right, and there's an illness, well, then clearly the two are related. And that is a jump which is highly irresponsible. And I've given this example before of if someone is, if you multiply, let's say, trace amounts of a poisoning by a factor of 1,000 or 1,000,000, you could find almost any pollutant in almost every person alive, whether it be mercury or lead or rat poison or whatever. You could, but does that mean that the mere presence of that is causing that person to express a certain illness? No. So is this a trick that's been pulled on all of us? Oh, we found a part of a protein somewhere in your body that sort of looks like HIV, and we noticed your energy level is low. Well, you must have fatigue because you have AIDS now, which is caused by this HIV. Well, A does not always lead to B. We don't know. It might. It absolutely might. But are there other factors potentially involved? Or are the two potentially completely unrelated? And the more I watch these doctors present, the more I read these papers, the more I question as to, okay, so someone tested positive for HIV. Now you want to give them medicine. Are they sick? Are they going to get sick? If they are sick, how do you know it's actually related to that HIV? Maybe they live near a cell tower. Maybe the diet is bad. I don't know. But that correlation is always made, and it's a big part of we found it. Well, now we need to start medicating, and we need to start medicating faster and more aggressively. We need to all keep this in mind, okay? The presence of a virus or a germ or a pollutant and having an illness, just because you have both does not necessarily mean that A is causing B. And I think there's a lot of research papers out there that they do not connect those dots. They just assume that's to be the case. And maybe if we start noticing that more, breaking that down more, we could expose a lot of the problems that, or the bad responses that we have to the unsuccessful responses to illnesses that we've been observing. Do you guys have anything to add to that? Your thoughts to that?
That would make a very good blog article, especially having in assisting to write the article a expert in probability and statistics. And I've often talked about that with our CEO and saying we need something like that to help people understand the difference between that correlation does not imply causation, and starting from that principle, work our way up and outward into, well, how come they say Ebola makes you feel bad and I don't feel good, so maybe I have Ebola? That kind of thing.
Exactly.
We need to stop that right away.
All right. Press play.
Now, when I was talking about vaccine concepts, what I was really referring to is on this slide, and that is that we start with an idea of what might work with a vaccine. And I'll tell you what it will be for our current generation of HIV vaccines in a minute. We then generate vaccine candidates, and those vaccine candidates are either pieces of DNA, pieces of virus, pieces of protein that we then inject into small animal models to induce immune responses. And it is those immune responses that we're trying to induce that form the basis of the hypothesis for the vaccine candidate.
But the response will be completely different in a human for the most part.
These are advanced
It could also. Some of these they're talking about respiratory viruses, and they want an immunity in the bloodstream against something that comes in through your lungs. And your first layer of defense is actually your lungs. It's not your blood. So there's that's all ass backwards too. But let's just cover a little bit of the asinineness at a time, because there's so much.
In preclinical studies. And then because of the urgency of the HIV pandemic, we proceed directly from small animal and immunogenicity studies into phase 1 human studies and try to advance these very quickly to phase 3. This happens in parallel with non-human primate studies. There are really 2 reasons for this. One is that the non-human primate, it differs in many respects from human disease. And so we feel that we learn more by actually studying this in humans. And secondly, because this introduces a significant delay often in the studies, we like to get into human trials. The point is that this really is research. It's hypothesis-driven research. The vaccine concept is the hypothesis. And unfortunately for us who work in the field, the actual test of the hypothesis comes with the completion of the phase 3 study. The concept is only tested once we find out that this has worked or has not worked in humans. This makes for a long process. It makes for a process that can be disjointed. And one of the reasons to have vaccine research centers and to have collaborative groups of investigators.
Whoa. So he just said, unfortunately for us, we only know if the hypothesis, the vaccine works, after we test it in people.
See, that explains warp speed. They're like, you know what? All that animal testing is useless. Why don't we just go straight to putting it in humans? We'll figure out if it works then, right?
He's even saying, that testing it in humans is inconvenient to them. Unfortunately for us.
I think it's inconvenient for whoever might die from taking the thing they're given.
It's like everything that does not mean immediately making a vaccine and injecting it into people is inconvenient. And when you boil it down, it's like, how do we get by everything? This is what was on top of these guys' minds. 2003. How do we get this done faster? How do we get by the trials and the testing and the human testing and this and that and the A/B stuff? We just needed to go from factory to arms immediately.
To make sure that all these various aspects of the science that range from science that's as basic as X-ray crystallography to as complicated as doing international trials hangs together in one continuous way. Now, the hypothesis for the current generation of HIV vaccine candidates is that we need both cell-mediated immunity, mediated by T cells in the body, as well as neutralizing antibodies to presumably to conserved regions of the viruses. And that if we can induce those responses, we will either prevent the infection entirely, or we can use that to control the disease. Now, we're doing quite well these days in generating cell-mediated immune responses. We're not doing so well in terms of generating broadly neutralizing antibody responses. We can generate antibodies to very specific strains of the virus, but in fact, they don't cross-react with all of the strains that occur naturally in the world. And that is going to be a major limitation and may in fact be rate limiting for at least for the first generation of vaccines. Now, the major challenges for the development of the vaccine is that we need not only to develop this cell-mediated immune response, but we need to make sure that it's long-lasting and that it can survive for years when people might be continually challenged by this virus. We do need to identify structures on the virus that can elicit these broadly neutralizing antibodies that I've mentioned are so elusive. We very importantly, as we move forward into the large-scale trials, is that essentially when it comes to the development of vaccines for AIDS, we're really wandering in the wilderness. We have no examples in nature of natural immunity to these viruses. This stands in marked contrast to diseases like smallpox or West Nile or SARS even, where we know that there are people, a well-defined cohort of people who may get infected, may actually see the virus, but they can clear it and they can become immune to this disease. With HIV, it is very rare to find people who are actually immune or can do well long-term with these viruses. Even the long-term non-progressive patients are still infected. and they're just containing their viremia a little bit better than other people.
Okay, that right there is. I'll have to look at the timeline on that. That's a little bit of a misinformation. That's not really true there. And I'm going to give 2 examples to what he said was that there's no examples of people being able to survive or when they are presented with this virus, when they are infected with this virus. Two things. One is, as he did just say, there's many strains of HIV, and that's from what I understand, that's quite true. There appears to be a higher correlation of some of those types of HIV being in some bloodstreams and illness than others. So people who have more immune disorders tend to test positive for what's called HIV-2, but there's also an HIV-1. And what some doctors did as early as the 1990s, so this is years before this speech by Gary Nabel, where they actually found some people who had rather severe AIDS. Their immune systems were really breaking down. They tested positive for HIV-2. They had tested positive. And then they actually presented them with HIV-1. So they actually gave another, although a form of HIV to these people, a form of HIV which was correlated, wasn't proven causal, but correlated with lesser symptoms. And sure enough, a vast majority of those patients got better. So there had been research on how to have HIV infection, presence of some types of HIV, and reduced symptoms or eliminated symptoms, not 100%, but reduced. Also, Canada's HIV leading doctor, the late Dr. Francis Plummer, observed that there were some people in Africa, of all people, sex workers, who you would think, oh my goodness, they would be the most likely to succumb to HIV, actually had the highest rate of survivability. It's almost as if there were so many forms of HIV, and whichever ones were were less symptomatic with respect to immunity problems, they would be healthier. So there, and these are just the 2 that I know in my limited experience, or the last few years reading these papers. There might be a lot more. So Nabel's trying to maintain this paranoia that there's no way any person can survive. All right, the exposure to this virus. We need to find a way to immunize people. We need to explore more forms of immunization. And while I'm certainly not trying to say that there is not this virus present in the population, how it got there is another story. There is evidence that there had been ways to either to develop some natural immunity to it, or maybe even use what was known as the different strains of HIV to reduce the symptoms to it. And there were probably a bunch of other stuff as well that we just haven't even gotten into. But he's maintaining this pace of it's novel. The body just doesn't know what to do, and we need to create some sort of synthetic immunity using advanced vaccine technology. We have to do it. 20 years later, what do we have? Coronavirus, which is sort of a new spin on things. But again, it's the urgency, and it's novel. There's no way the body can figure out how to become immune to it. But I forget who said this, and I'm not trying to steal this from anyone, right? All of these advanced vaccine technologies, whether it's mRNA or DNA or whatever, ultimately use the body's natural immune system to develop immunity. It's not as if it creates an antibody that, never could have been created otherwise, right? These vaccines, these gene therapy methods, these transfection methods are still ultimately using the body's natural immunity capabilities to protect itself against these novel, never before seen pathogens. It's not completely artificial. Remember, our bodies are so capable, are so flexible that we can be born and find ways to become immune to things which didn't even exist on Earth when we were born. That's how capable, flexible, and adaptable we are.
That's
But these
God's
scientists
creation.
want you to think otherwise. They want you to think that you're helpless, and the only thing that can save them, that save you and me and our families, is their wizardry.
The first person, Mark, that I met that convinced me that there was something not right about the vaccine industry was one of my neighbors in Italy. She had to survive the Second World War as a sex worker, and she said that even afterwards, she did many dirty jobs in the tip of the boot. That she got sick many times, and she went through so many different sicknesses, and I couldn't list them all. But she said, in 2008, when and this is like 2 years before she died, she was like in her late 90s. She said that the Italian newspapers were telling, MERS is swine flu. Oh, swine flu. 5 million people are going to die if we don't vaccinate everybody. And she was like, "What? Who are they kidding? Who are they kidding? People my age who've been through everything, and nothing's going to touch us. If we've survived, everything, all the sicknesses during the war and all those things, nothing is going to hurt us." So that's when I said the immune system is much more beautiful, like Tyrone said, God's creation, than we give it credit for.
Amen.
And guys, we got about 3 minutes. And thank you so much, Mark, for being on with us today. Great research as usual. And you guys don't forget that you can always find all his research at HousatonicLive.com, HousatonicITS.com. And there's a bounty of research here. And also, if you like his research, don't forget to support him on Patreon.
Or support Neighborhood News and support all of us at the same time.
Whatever you're able to do. Also, a little disclaimer for some of our subscribers. We try to send out a notice for each show. So you might need to check your spam folders, because we end up in your spam folder.
Good point.
And also for our Journal Club members, check your spam folder because you might not be getting it. So, but thank you again, Mark. And we got the research wrap up coming up in about 2-3 minutes. So, any final words, Mark, before we get out of here?
Today's the day of Boston Marathon. It's perfect weather, so we should expect record times across the board and no health issues. So I'm looking forward to the results.
Are they wearing masks?
No, but they are all fully protected. Let's put it that way.
Oh, did you have to get the vaccine, quote unquote, vaccinated in order to
Yep.
participate?
Yes.
Oh, and you said that's today?
Yes. It's always the Monday after. Yeah.
Anybody drop it like you have been at the soccer games.
I hope not.
Over it, but good luck to the people that's in the race. And thank you again, Mark, for being on with us today.
Thanks for having me. Great job today, guys. Pleasure doing business with you.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.
All right, we're handing off to Studio A.
Gentlemen, great show with Mark at Housatonic Live. You guys did great work. I'm jealous of Studio B now. Looking at that nice backdrop.
We'll switch it up.
John and Tyrone looking handsome. You guys are intelligent, so just keep up the great work. Mark, he was wearing his sunglasses on top of his head the entire interview. I didn't know if he ever even noticed. They were scrunched in there, but yeah, keep up the great work. Mark, can you guys do the switch on Wix, please?
Okay, you got it.
All right. I do have a video here that Mr. George Webb did. Sorry, here, Mark, too loud background music still. But I do have a video here that Mr. George Webb did on D Live yesterday, Patriots Soapbox with this Dan Happel. So it was an interesting interview, and he kind of breaks things down in a easy to understand way. So I thought our audience might enjoy it. Then after that, I have some research about Mr. Barrick synthetically creating the SARS virus in a laboratory, along with Ron Fauci working. He was one of the first scientists, our Erasmus lab gain of function scientist. He was one of the first scientists to work on SARS. He, in fact, was on the team that did the Koch's postulate, which determines that it's actually a virus, and that was all under Fauci's leadership. So I'll be digging into that as well. And then we have Aaron's wife, Miss Rita Adler, is going to be joining us this evening as a special guest here at neighborhoodnewsstudio.com. She grew up in Ghana, Africa, and we've been breaking down the Ebola virus, Zika virus, and some of these other viruses in Africa, and the whole zoonosis theory that Nathan Wolfe and Metabiota has been basing their work off of, pretty much. And they say it's bushmeat. Everyone's eating rotten bushmeat, and Rita's gonna come into the studio tonight and tell our audience at neighborhoodnewsstudio.com that if it wasn't for bushmeat, that that a lot of people wouldn't survive, and B, like, people aren't getting infected by viruses like they're saying so, because it's a lot more, it happens a lot more in their society in Africa than it does over here, and it's not, it's not really a big deal. But we are going to be doing a little intro here as we go. As before I show this video, we're going to be doing a little intro here into George Webb's video here with Dan Happel, where we're going to be doing a little switch on Webb.
Welcome to World War DARPA. This is George Webb, and I've been going all over the world to different bioweapons plants in England, Porton Down. Of course, I've done DynCorp here in the United States and Indianapolis, chasing all these pathogens and rare diseases that seem to be brokered to the Ukrainians from our own DOD, from our own technology companies, and also Fort Detrick, where we did a lot of these pathogens. And they ended up in places like Ukraine, and they may be now deployed in places like Ukraine on this front line of NATO in this NATO battle. There's secret vaccines that have been in the works that are being controlled by Ukrainian billionaires, and diseases of old are now made new again with these chimeric new diseases. So there's a lot in this book about USAID, of course, with PREDICT, the Hunter Biden connection with Metabiota. And of course, we have all the shell companies that the Russian Ministry of Defense has talked about, and Gilead, of course, developing vaccines, the connection to Hunter Biden, MI6, Christopher Steele, the Chinese Foreign Information Industries, the 336 different labs the U.S. and the DOD has built around the world, and of course, the connection to the blackberries. History is repeated now from 1943, right now in Kiev, the Cossack dancer himself, Christopher Steele, giving pathogens for these crazy bioweapons programs to migrate bats with ticks and fleas and mosquitoes, as well as migratory birds, believe it or not. So we cover all the details, and of course, the ever-present Klaus Schwab is there. I go over all the different appearances I've made and the books I've written to cover the topic, and all new, all updated. So if you bought the existing book, you're going to see all new graphics and a new update, and it's going to be about 1/5 the price of the old book. So this is going to be an audio-visual book. You're going to get all these new graphics, all these new updates of gathering of information from various.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I've decided before I dig into the George Webb video, I do got a little bit of research I'd like to share with you. Here, let me find the correct tablet here real quick. And this is regarding Ralph Barrick and some of his work he's done with the coronavirus. And he says a couple things in this article that I like, and we'll dig in here. So the article's titled "SARS Virus Recreated Opens Door for Potential Defenses Against Future Strains." And this was November 27, 2008, University of Chapel Hill. So we're Ralph Barrick, I like to dig into him. Researchers at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill Vanderbilt University Medical Center has synthetically reconstructed the bat variant of the SARS coronavirus that caused the SARS epidemic of 2003. The scientists say designing and synthesizing the virus is a major step forward in their ability to find effective vaccines and treatments for any strain of SARS virus that might affect humans in the future. Maybe this is why they received the patent from Gilead Sciences to work on remdesivir and create it in the lab. The known therapeutic for SARS-CoV-2. Only three, and I think the virus is synthetic, and this is why I believe they can't find like the bats and all that. It was all reverse engineered by Ralph Barrick right here. Only 3 other teams of researchers have synthetically reconstructed a virus. In this case, we constructed the likely progenitor of the SARS-CoV epidemic, says Ralph Barrick. If that line doesn't, I'll read that again. In this case, we reconstructed the likely progenitor of the SARS-CoV epidemic, says Ralph Barrick. Why would you reconstruct that? Epidemiology professor at UNC Gilling School of Global Public Health and one of the leaders on the project. The bat SARS virus is about 4 times larger than any other virus that has been synthesized to date. It will allow us to test the pathways in which the virus emerges and understand the ways that animal coronaviruses move from one species to another. So that was very important. It's a big virus, So if they're adding spike proteins, they need a lot of room. They need a lot of space. This is their first time doing this, so SARS-CoV it is. Barrick and his team of epidemiology researchers worked with counterparts at Vanderbilt University Medical Center led by Mark Dennison. I've showed a video of Ralph Barrick and Mark Dennison talking about reverse engineering the viruses, and they created a chimeric virus as well. So they created a synthetic virus, a fully synthetic virus, and they created a chimeric recombinant version as well in the UNC lab. The 2 teams collaborated closely to review the existing sequences of all bat SARS viruses, predict the actual sequence of bat SARS-CoV that would be able to grow, design the synthesis of the genome, and recover and characterize the viruses that were synthetically reconstructed and rescued in the laboratory. They also studied the pathogenesis of the ability of therapeutics targeting epidemic strains to cure bat SARS-CoV infection. SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, it was originally called sudden acute respiratory syndrome. The original SARS was, by the way, it's believed to have the first emergence in humans in Asia in late 2002. Then Ron Fauci and his team got a hold of it and did their little aerosolization experiments at the Erasmus lab on the monkeys. I got the paper that says that as well. And boom, we got SARS-CoV-2 20 years later. Took a lot of work in between. Over the next several months, the illness spread to more than 24 countries in North America, South America, Europe, Asia before the global outbreak was contained. Of the more than 8,000 people worldwide who were diagnosed with SARS in 2003, 774 died. Let me get that full screen right there. Let me get a different background too. Barrick said SARS is believed to have originated in bats and jumped to humans either directly or through raccoon dogs and palm civets, both considered delicacies for humans in China. So there's your bushmeat. We're going to have Rita Adler in here later to say bushmeat. Not only does it taste good, but they need it to survive in some places of the world. Although the strains associated with the 2002-2003 epidemic no longer circulate in humans, this is important. I'm going to repeat that again. This is important. And read it slower. Although the strains associated with the 2002-2003 epidemic no longer circulate in humans, they don't circulate in humans anymore. The sudden appearance of SARS on the scene, the original SARS, was just as mysterious as the disappearance as well. It's like it went away for 20 years until it was needed again. The animal precursor strains are common and will likely re-emerge in the future, he said. The key problem is that many of the vaccines and therapeutics targeting the 2002-2003 epidemic strains may not work against the future emergent strains. So this is why we need to reverse engineer it in the lab. Barrick said synthesizing the SARS-CoV variant that infects bats and then modifying it so that it can grow well in the laboratory animals will allow researchers to search for vaccines and treatments that would be effective against any strain of SARS that might infect humans in the future. So they created a synthesized version, a fully synthetic version of SARS that infects bats. They modified it, and they sprayed it on the animals. And here we are. And this was written in 2008. This is talking about what they're going to do with this synthetic virus. This is talking about what they're going to be researching with Shang Lizi in the Wuhan lab and the Ukrainians. What the future is going to behold. Does this sound familiar? Oh, the SARS came from bats. This is creating a synthetic SARS in 2008, Ralph Barrick and his team. Third time it's ever been done in history, creating a fully synthetic virus. I need to find the other two. I'm guessing it's anthrax and smallpox. It's my guess. Viruses that start in animals and mutate to infect humans tend to be slightly different each year. An example is the influenza virus, which is different each year and requires a different vaccine each year to provide immunity. That's why they're trying to create the universal influenza vaccine. By reconstructing the synthetic bat SARS virus, I repeat, by reconstructing the synthetic bat SARS virus. It was they no longer found this in human populations anymore. They reconstructed it. We have a model that will allow us to design better vaccines and drugs that will treat any strain of this virus that infects humans, Barrick said. So they use the synthetic bat SARS-like virus to create the model for the mRNA vaccine. In short, remdesivir, in short. This is what his team was doing here at SARS. The value of the research goes beyond SARS, he added. Potentially, we can apply this technology to many other emerging viruses, he said. Then perhaps we wouldn't have to develop it to many other emerging viruses they engineer in the lab, reverse engineer in the lab. Then perhaps we wouldn't have to develop a new therapy each year, but can find treatments that will be effective against all of the root viruses. Isn't that what they're trying to do with COV? You know, we got all the variants coming out, left and right, Omicron, Delta. I can't even think of Beta, Alpha, Omega. Where's it going to lead? It's like the Greek alphabet. Dang it. So many SARS-CoV variants are gonna pop up because of the synthetics. They created a synthetic, like they call, I think it was called like a pseudo virus, where they put all the different bat strains on the virus. You know, he just said it's a big virus. That's why they needed the SARS, because it's the biggest one. So they added all these different spike proteins to it, infected animals with like the universal spike protein virus. Then they tested the animals afterwards. They were like, okay, which strains got those animals sick? So they went, okay, the civets got sick by this one, the bats got sick by this one, the mice got sick by this one. You get the point. Then from that point on, they tried to get it to go to humans. And they were effective between bats, humans, and SARS. Ralph Baric and his team in 2008. I just, what are you doing over there? Sorry, I'm getting distracted here, ladies and gentlemen. I just hope, Tyrone, can you turn the lights on? Look how gross I look without the lights on. It's all about lighting, ladies and gentlemen. Don't you know that, Tyrone?
Oh yeah, we know it well right here at the news studio.
So that's my main theory on where SARS came from. Is I think it's a fully synthetic virus that was created in the lab. They went about and created the chimeric viruses. I guess it could have been all of them. They could have been the chimeric virus, could have been the synthetic virus. And this is why we have the different types of vaccines and therapeutics they're testing. This may be why you see like the Robert Malone's going, oh, the mRNA vaccine is fake, blah, 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 because he doesn't have the money in the pocket for those certain ones. I'm not 100% sure. But this is why you could see like a little bit of disconnect with the scientists as well. Because there's different viruses, there's different therapeutics, there's different vaccines. All I know, it kept being engineered in the lab. So I got another article to play before we get into George Webb's video, or to read before we get into George Webb's video. And it's regarding proteins. We talked a lot about proteins. Proteins. It's one of the things that Mark Kulacz likes to chat about. There's a very specific one in here that pretty much the DPP4, and it's very specific to the SARS coronavirus. So, novel virus entry portal found. Researchers identify the target protein of a recently discovered human coronavirus, shedding light on infection and possible interspecies spread. And this was written 2013. So the virus wasn't around anymore in 2013. Here we go. Dutch researchers have identified the host cell protein that allows a recently discovered coronavirus to enter its target cells, according to a study published today in Nature. The structure of the protein, called DPP4, appears to be conserved between bats and humans, suggesting that the new findings will help shed light on zoonotic transmission of the virus, as well as provide a target for potential vaccines. It's a huge study, said Ralph Baric, a virologist at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who is not involved in the research. They quoted a bunch of scientists in this article, and they were all not involved in the research, but they were they had a lot to say about it, a lot of good things to say about it. So we got the synthetic virus being created, and Ralph Baric being happy that they found this DPP4 protein. Anytime you identify a receptor that a virus uses, it tells you a whole lot about its biology, where it targets, how it causes disease, and it tells you a lot about trans-species movement and the frequency of that event. The fact that the new coronavirus can use both bat and human receptors for infections without drastically mutating raises the unsettling possibility that some coronavirus are pre-primed to jump species, Barrick added. Yeah, they're pre-primed because you engineered it that way in the lab, Mr. Barrick. You're not... Frustrating. This is why Neighborhood News Studio exists. To cover the gray area. Ooh. The gray. I guess the gray zone or whatever. Isn't there already I don't know if that's what they're trying to do, but we're trying to cover the gray. The part they like to leave out. Until the deadly SARS virus was identified as a coronavirus in 2003, only 2 coronaviruses were known to infect humans, generally causing mild colds. Since then, 3 more have been identified, though none as virulent as SARS. The latest virus, discovered in a Qatari man in June 2012 and dubbed human coronavirus EMC, HCoV-EMC, by researchers at the Erasmus Medical Center in the Netherlands. So that's Ron Fauci's virus. That's that's the Fauci's. So Hong Kong owns a patent on the virus, on the original virus. Fauci owns this Qatari patent, and we have Ralph Barrick owning the synthetic version of the virus. And this is where I think the battle, like the Moderna battle, comes into play with Pfizer and AstraZeneca and BioNTech. This is why I think there's a giant scientific battle going on in the SARS-CoV community, in which therapeutic is better, which vaccine is better, because they all own a different version of the virus. I'll show you the Hong Kong patent in a second, but that's where the original virus broke out of, was in Hong Kong. So they own the first one. Then Ron Fauci starts tinkering with the Hong Kong virus. He does his gain of function work. Oh, and then all of a sudden there's a man in Qatari that's sick. And now Ron Fauci owns this version at the Erasmus Medical Center. And then I just showed you Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He created a synthetic version of the virus. He also created a chimeric version of the virus as well. And you got this big battle going on in the scientific community. Which therapeutic or which vaccine is the proper way to go, or if you should even take it at all. And this is why they all got their different patents, ladies and gentlemen. The Qatari man in June 2012 by researchers at the Erasmus Medical Center in the Netherlands. So Netherlands owns a patent. Ralph Barrick owns a synthetic patent, and Hong Kong owns a patent of the SARS coronavirus. They're all slightly different. Is associated with severe respiratory disease and kidney failure, and like SARS, appears related to bat coronaviruses. Unlike SARS, however, the new virus doesn't easily transmit between humans. Of the 13 people who've been infected, 8 have died, though it's not clear whether the virus was the direct cause of death, noted EMC virologist Bart Hagmans. Remember that name? He's the one that found the protein also. So the Dutch team with Ron Fauci, they found this protein, this very important protein. I'm going to keep reading about it. Coronaviruses get their name from structures called spike proteins that stud their capsids and determine which host cells a particular coronavirus can bind and infect. In order to understand which species and which cells HCoV-EMC targets, Hagmans collaborated with researchers at Utrecht University to create a recombinant EMC spike protein and screen for cells that bound to it, identifying a human liver cell line. We were just talking about livers and cell lines the other day with George Webb, and we kind of blew it off. Now I wish I remembered what we were talking about. The researchers then used a detergent to release the liver cell's membrane-bound proteins, employing the recombinant spike protein to fish out the specific receptor to which the spike protein bound. Finally, a mass spectrometry analysis of the protein identified it as dipeptide peptidase 4, DPP4, a novel receptor for coronaviruses. Sure enough, antibodies against DPP4 block virus infection while expressing DPP4 in virus-resistant cells rendered them easily infected by HCOV EMC. The researchers also found that DPP4 is expressed on a variety of cells, including kidney cells and cells deep in the lung. And that's how you know the virus is aerosolized sometimes, when it's deep in the lungs. You know, that's how they know it was. They knew it was the weaponized anthrax. You know, they could tell. Like, just give me the lung samples, and like, oh, yep, yeah, I could tell immediately. It's that the anthrax was deep in the lungs. Same thing here with HCOV. Now that we know that EMC's, did I skip a little bit? Sorry. The HCOV EMC's deep lung infection may explain the virus's propensity for causing severe respiratory disease, but being difficult to transmit between humans, said Hagman. So far down in there, like you almost got to like cough in the person's face to transmit it. Not or kiss them, I guess. Now that to be more appropriate. Now that we know that EMC spike and human DPP4 are likely the most important proteins in HCOV EMC infection, we can start looking at ways to interfere with that interaction to protect people, noted virologist Rachel Roper of East Carolina University, who was also not involved in the research. They all like to keep their distance. This could include using recombinant molecules to screen for drug targets that block spike protein binding to DPP4, creating vaccines focused on EMC spike protein to raise antibodies that prevent viral binding to target cells, Roper noted. Indeed, a recent Journal of Virology paper demonstrated that serum from HCOV EMC infected patients could block virus binding to target cells, suggesting that neutralizing antibodies can be produced. The researchers also found that the virus can infect bat cells using bat DPP4. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Here's your bat human protein, DPP4. Though HCOV EMC found at the Erasmus lab. Though HCOV EMC is related to bat coronaviruses, so far no infections have been linked to bats, suggesting an intermediate host carried the virus from bats to humans, said Gary Whitaker, a virologist at Cornell University who is not involved in the research. You know, where Fauci went. DPP4's role in HCOV EMC's pathogenesis should also be investigated more fully, noted Sonia Navis-Martin, a molecular virologist at Drexel University, who did not participate in the study. DPP4 plays important roles in hormone regulation, and it may be that HCOV EMC affects a protein's function after infection, she explained. But for now, the findings are a huge step forward. To my knowledge, DPP4 was not previously known as a receptor for any other virus. Was that because it was engineered in a lab? I'm going to repeat. To my knowledge, DPP4 was not previously known as a receptor for any other virus. The very first show that Andy DeBala ever did here in Neighborhood News Studio, live with Andy on YouTube, I talked about the synthetic creation of the virus and the protein corona formation, and how when you introduce the gold nanoparticle to the body's blood system, the protein comes over and interacts with it, and it creates this protein corona formation around the gold nanoparticle. Is that how DPP-4 was created, ladies and gentlemen? Did they use synthetic biology to create DPP-4? It was not previously known to be a receptor, to bind receptors for any other virus, but it is now. And I just showed you that it was synthetically created in a lab by Ralph Baric. There's a lot of things starting to link up here, ladies and gentlemen. Things are fishy. Things are fishy. So I got I think a video here. Let's take a break from Andy's voice and Andy's. What do you think about what I was just talking about, John? Do you got a mic over there? Here, you can steal this one. Come on, screen, John. Come on, screen. What do you think about what I was just getting into?
Well, I was just looking for an old episode of Caveman Science where you brought that up about the novel receptor.
Well, you should actually play that. How embarrassing would that be for me? Let's go to my show here. Your channel. Live with Andy.
Your voice gets deeper as time goes on.
So this is I actually haven't done a video on here in like 2 months. I'm almost done with my strikes, ladies. And once I'm done with my strikes, I'll start it back up. But if you go down here, was the coronavirus created in a lab, protein corona and the nanoparticle technology? What did I just talk to you guys about? You heard it here first on Live with Andy. I summed it up for you, but there's even more proof with this DPP-4 protein and the synthetic creation of the virus by Ralph Baric. They said it went away. It wasn't around anymore. They synthetically created it. It was the third time ever they created a virus in a lab. The first time, I believe, was smallpox. I talked about that previously. I wonder what the third one is, but yeah, and the important part about synthetic biology is the protein corona formation. How to manipulate that. The size of the nanoparticle, the shape of the nanoparticle, once you put it in the bloodstream, and the blood type it was introduced to, that all affected the protein corona formation that developed on the outside of the nanoparticle. And if they, just did enough experiments, they figured out, oh, this DPP-4 can transmit to humans and transmit to bats. We've been doing this Ralph Baric experiment with the large nanoparticle. We added the different spikes. It's like we're all like the virus, I think, was completely created synthetically in a lab. And this whole zoonosis theory they're just putting out there is just trying to cover up their tracks at this point.
Yeah, I'm leaning more and more in that direction.
And
especially after Mark's latest episode.
Thank God for researchers like Mark, George, myself. Thank God.
Where's the button? Come on, man.
Thank God for researchers.
Thank God for cavemen. Was it Warren Buffett?
Caveman got booted, actually. So at my original show, Caveman Science got the boot, and I had to go to Live with Andy. I did one show at George, and they were just like, "You're gone."
A few years ago, Warren Buffett's Geico had a commercial with "So easy, even a caveman can understand it." You remember that?
Yeah, that's how you do. Oh, before I get into the video,
nanoparticles are not good. Even a caveman knows it because, for example, this is tangentially related. Massachusetts Institute of Technology has a very open campus. Just about any researcher from anywhere in the world can come in with very few credentials and get into just about any laboratory, but not the nanotechnology lab. That requires I won't say a top secret clearance, but it requires some pretty special credentials before you can get into that one.
Well, the the furin cleavage patent was filed at the University of Florida. Coincidentally, I did a video when I was in Gains of Functionville,
Gains of Functionville.
right in front of the synthetic nanotechnology lab. It was all this synthetic biology, it's changed the game, and DARPA started dumping a lot of money into it in 2007 while Michael Callahan was head of like the within the defense sciences department. He was like one of the biology directors and synthetic biology, and the creation of these therapeutics, this Operation Warp Speed therapeutics, that was all DARPA's baby under Michael Callahan. And like he's done a lot of work with Barrick and the team. The first person to get remdesivir, I believe, was a patient off of one of the ships, the remember that cruise ship that got stranded at sea?
Right. Yeah.
The first patient to receive remdesivir, I believe, was the patient off of the cruise ship, and Michael Callahan was on that cruise ship doing work, and Ralph Barrick was the one at North Carolina that got the patent to develop remdesivir.
I'm surprised Michael Callahan wasn't the pilot, the captain of the ship, with all of his all the stories, all of the blog posts that were written about him, how he bravely swam 20 miles down the Yangtze River.
Oh, it's a heroic story. He had to fend off fishermen, and I'm sure it's, if he had to actually swim in it, it would be polluted, I'm sure, and I wouldn't like to take a dip in it. It's probably worse than the Hudson. But I do have a short little thing I'm going to read on Nathan Wolfe before we get into the video, showing you that he's pro reverse genetics as well. And this article is called "Virus Hunter Nathan Wolfe Tells of the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of Microbes." And this was written in 2012. In today's world, there are deadly viruses like bird flu or SARS can be spread from continent to continent in a matter of hours, and there's a real danger of a pandemic. We should all be worried, a little worried all the time, says Nathan Wolfe. But Wolfe AM 97, SD 99. What's AM? Texas A&M? If he's Texas A&M 97 and San Diego 99, wow. Wow. Also, would that be, or American? I'm not sure what AM would be. Also knows that scientists today have powerful new techniques to help track and contain killer bugs, and that the number of good microbes far outweigh the bad ones. Wolfe talked about the latest virus fighting methods and his own experience as one of the world's top virus hunters at Harvard Medical School of Public Health, founder and CEO of Metabiota, Stanford University, Viral Storm. Where's the reverse genetics part? Anyway, it gets into reverse sequencing genetics.
It jumped up a little bit.
Sequencing virus genes. Wow, this article is a lot longer than I thought. Okay, once scientists have a blueprint of a virus genome, they can literally bring it back to life in the lab through a new technique called reverse genetics. It's an important tool for studying how viruses work, but must be used with caution. In the hands of terrorists, Wolfe acknowledged this technique could pose a grave threat. Wolfe's in the hands of terrorists like Ralph Barrick, Michael Callahan, and our health network funded by the United States tax dollars. Whatever we're doing that's cutting edge in the lab now is going to be do-it-yourself biology within the next 10 years, he said. Big data can also help fight the spread of viruses. Wolfe said scientists can combine the digital exhaust from millions of cell phone calls people make with disease prevalence data to get a clear picture of how disease is spreading, which can help them figure out how best stop it. So that's Nathan Wolf backing up reverse genetics. And I also have an article. I'm not going to read anymore, ladies and gentlemen. I know you're getting sick and tired of Andy reading. Can we watch the George Webb video on D-Line? But
Is that the one he did yesterday?
That's the one he did yesterday. I'm going to be showing for the audience here before Rita Adler comes on and talks about bushmeat. But I also have Nathan Wolf writing an excerpt in Time magazine on Ron Fauci, a Mr. Gain of Function at the Erasmus Lab, who gain of function SARS as well and created the DPP4 protein that's only found in SARS. Erasmus Lab, Ron Fauci. Nathan Wolf wrote the excerpt on him in Time magazine, backing up that gain of function work should be done for the benefit of humankind because it's too risky not to do it. That's what he said about Fauci and H5N1 research, as the rest of the scientific community was saying, whoa, hold your horses, gain of function. Hold your horses. You're going to create a pandemic. Nathan Wolf had his back. So does Ralph Barrick. So does Michael Callahan. They didn't want to see the research money go away. But we're going to get to George Webb's video on D-Line after this
commercial break.
George, welcome to the program. Thank you for being here. I think that also that Juliet Engel may try to join us as well, just so she can hear what you're talking about and maybe ask you some questions from over here in the United States. So, George, welcome to the program. George Webb has been involved. He's a software designer by trade, but he's been involved in exposing all the intrigues that have been going on in the Obama administration, now the Biden administration, but also all the things that have been going on with our DOD, our DARPA programs, our intelligence agencies, and boy, I'll tell you what, this is going to be a wonderful program. George, thank you again for joining us from clear over in Europe. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Dan. It's always great to be on your program. And thanks to Thumper for providing that great engineering, even though he's probably getting all kinds of DOS attacks and everything else. So, yeah, I'm as close as you can get to Ukraine without being in Ukraine. And, you know, we're talking in the lobby with other correspondents. There's no correspondence here from CNN. I'll tell you that. Not in these rooms. This is more, you know, self-financed journalism here. But, you know, we really try to get out there, get on the road, get out of our grandmother's basement and go see the people. I interviewed a family today on the train where the father was still back in Zaporizhia on the Dnieper River because they're holding all men between the age of 18 and 65. And then here at the train station, I've been on the train all day for 16 hours, so I barely made it here in time. But you can see there people are trying to get out of there. I mean, they don't want to be, you know, a casualty of this thing. Especially, I think this is two ideologies fighting it out. There's a very, it's a solid government of Ukraine, I think, that's got the backbone to be a good Ukraine, but then they made a partnership with these neo-Nazis and they just let them into the army and they let them rule with an iron hand in the eastern Donbass region, in the Donetsk and the Lugansk region, and it ended up being a genocide. And then they started doing the bioweapons, doing the bio genocide and targeting Russian blood, if you can believe it, all sorts of crazy stuff. And I think Putin, it's like how how long do you let the school bully go?
Mhm.
And at some point, you have to come in and really give him a butt kicking to get him back in line. And unfortunately, the people that suffer are all the people that are just innocent bystanders.
Mhm.
The picture is a little girl I was talking to. I was trying to teach her how to count to 20 in English, or American, I should say, not English. But it's just really heartbreaking stories. There was 3 families all together on the train with me. They were living in 3 rooms all together. There's a lot of displacement. And if you can reach out to any of the Catholic aid organizations or any of the church organizations, please do. But anyway, we want to get out of our mother's basement, Dan, and that's why I'm here.
Mhm. Well, I have to say that I've been promoting this program for a week because since you were on Tuesday, I knew that you were going to try to make it back, and I've just been excited to hear what you've encountered, because you were looking at the bioweapons programs in Holland and France. I think you went through Germany too, didn't you?
Yeah, I went through Germany. Marburg is a big area.
Mm-hmm.
I went through Belgium, so NATO, and basically tracking kind of the bioweapons trail. It's also the same route that Napoleon took.
Wow.
And the same route Hitler. I mean, Hitler went to the north a little bit. So a lot of the uses of bioweapons happen in the area where you have an overwhelming advantage on one side or the other with tanks, and you can't possibly stop them. It's 5-1 outnumbered. So you use bioweapons as the equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
And what slow them down is the idea. And then once they slow down and get sick, then you hit them with the artillery. That's patent at Kasserine Pass, right? So, or Rommel. So the general idea here is at these gaps, at these bottlenecks, natural bottlenecks, rivers, or in the mountains, you end up with these places developing bioweapons. That's all well and good during the Cold War, when there was this 5-1 or 7-1 or 10-1 advantage in tanks with the Russian tank invasion. But the problem is that the Soviet Union collapsed, and then we hired all the guys from a thing called Biopreparat, the Russian bioweapons program, and then we turned around and then started using a watered down version of those same things to now create breakouts and control and lockdown of civilian populations. And, we're living it right now. And they're talking about another one with bird flu coming. And that's the part where I get involved. That's the part where I say, whoa. I'm all for defending Germany and NATO and all that against the Russians. But when it starts turning around where you're using those weapons of war and then you're turning them around back against us in our own country, that cannot happen.
Well,
so that's why I'm here.
Well, I think what happened was, I guess our own government just got so far out of control. And we have to realize there are a lot of people in our own government that are globalists. And a lot of the people in our own government that are globalists are also into eugenics. They're eugenists, and they are also people who believe in the big green agenda. And bottom line is they plan to get rid of an awful lot of people. When you start thinking in that way of your own population, well, any population, good Lord, we're all humans. We are here on an Easter Sunday because God gave his son to really save us from ourselves. And he was resurrected today. And so we have this wonderful opportunity to be the greatest leaders in the entire world. And look what's going on. We've got these idiots in charge of our whole program. So that's, incidentally, I was going to ask you something. George, you said you were trying to get a press pass into Ukraine. Have you succeeded?
Well, I found out you can go in with just a regular passport. You don't need a visa, was what I was told by 3 different people on the train. And then I was talking to a guy who's going into Ukraine tomorrow or maybe the next day. The problem is the trains aren't running as reliably as they were because they're not targets. Where NATO's been shipping weapons in, trying to ship them in under the guise of lumber or whatever. And, those are military targets. So they don't run the train as much, but the cars you can do. So I would have to get a ride with somebody in the car, but there's just hanging around the lobby just for 10 minutes. Everybody's talking about going to Ukraine. So this is, I don't know if I'll be able to get in or not, but I want to really get to this place called Azovstal, where the Russians are kind of closing in on the Azov Brigade, these neo-Nazis. And this is in the eastern part of Ukraine. And this is the part I think Putin's trying to clean up. These are the same people that are accused of using the bioagents. And I think if you see Putin in the last week, he's really turned away from Kiev. He's really turned inward toward the Donbass, looking east and closing in. That's where the ship is sunk there. The Moskva ship is sunk. And now he's given him, a beautiful opportunity today. I was praying right along with you, Dan and Thumper. Please, 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 let's take this offer of an armistice and allow them to surrender. No questions asked. And the Russians had that till 1:00 Moscow time today from 6 a.m. this morning. I was praying all day, and they didn't take it. The Azov Brigade looks like they're even holding the NATO people hostage. So, unfortunately, we missed an opportunity, and I wish I had better news for everybody on Easter. But they did run up the Russian flag in Mariupol, so the people of the Donbass, after 8 years of genocide and ethnic cleansing, at least have their port back tonight.
That's wonderful. Now, I'm going to make a statement with you, and I probably should do it off air, but the fact is you're this is the way we're communicating. Bill Jasper, the editor of the New American Magazine, a senior editor, and Alex Newman are both good friends of mine. And I think if you would agree to write an article for the New American Magazine, I think we can get you a press pass through the New American, which is a real legit deal. If you want me to pursue that, I will.
Well, I know the New American really well, and I have a lot of respect for them, so that would be quite an honor. So yeah, absolutely, I would love to do that. I think the press pass is really going to be required. Otherwise, I am a military target. I haven't been shy about saying that the neo-Nazis with this Kolomoisky billionaire gangster is running roughshod in ethnic cleansing in Donbass for 8 years. And I hear he's paying $10,000 a corpse right now. But if I have a press pass, I know that they won't.
Less likely. Yeah.
Much less likely. Yeah. They can't just pick me up off the street. I'm a registered agent, so to speak. And that would be great. I'd love to do that.
Let me see if I can do that. I'll call even later this afternoon after the program and visit with Bill. And I think we could do that. If you'd be willing to write an article for the New American, take some photographs and bring some things with you, I think they would probably jump on that opportunity. And I know you're a good writer because you've written a number of books. So,
you like books. I wrote a lot of them. So
yeah.
I started, Dan.
You're muted, Greg.
Okay, thank you, Snupper. Yeah, sorry. George Webb doesn't know how to use his mute button yet. So, no, I got it. Thank you, Thumper. I started writing books from, the Common Sense with Thomas Paine was only 42 pages. I don't know if people know that, but it was good enough for the colonists. And so I started my first book at 42 pages, and I grew it with a series of pamphlets or booklets up to 100 pages, and I wrote 42 of those. just because I wanted to get the information out on different topics, and sold 18,000 of those. Then I started doing 200-page books and 300-page books, and then the last 7 that I wrote for Neighborhood News are 400-page books, 450 pages. They're can clobber somebody with them. So, and World War DARPA is certainly in that ballpark. Yeah,
I got right here. So
yeah. So yeah, I started writing because I got knocked off YouTube so many times. That's really why I started writing, and they knocked us out of, knocked me off of Amazon after having 20 or 30 bestsellers, and so now we ended up printing in house at Neighborhood News in Michigan. Well, then now we can't get ink because of this Klaus Schwab supply shortage. So I need to start writing for a website like New American.
Well, I think maybe that's an opportunity, and I'll see what I can do with that. Let me ask you this: you did go through Holland and Belgium and France. Talk about what you found out while you were traveling through those areas about the DARPA trail.
Well, DARPA is sort of like I think of the Q guy in the James Bond, where they're inventing all the gadgets, for warfare and spycraft and so forth. And you don't want that guy making policy. You want that guy enabling James Bond to do his job. And you want Q, the person who's the woman who was Judi Dench character running the show, you want her calling the shots and telling James Bond what to do. Now, that doesn't affect what he does in his after hours time, but still, you want there to be some control. DARPA is the other way around. DARPA is where the people doing the gadgets are calling the shots now. And they're coming up with wars just so they can play out their gadgets. And when it gets into bioagents, that's when it really gets really scary. And again, you could take any of these bioagents and just turn them down a little bit in terms of pathogenicity. And the only difference between really a toxin and a vaccine is the level of toxicity, right? Because you have to raise antibodies. That's the whole idea, but you don't want to do it too much and kill the person. So that's what I'm seeing right now is it's enabled this thing I call a virus vaccine game, because now DARPA's in the virus game. DARPA's in the vaccine game. They can create their own viruses. They can create their own vaccines with the same set of code. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous when you give people this magic wand that they can tap it and get $1 trillion every time they want $1 trillion. They just tap the wand. And that's really where we are. I mean, I went to Marburg, where we had the breakout of Marburg virus, Ebola, Congo, Crimea hemorrhagic fever. I talked to several of the PhDs that were working there, had a really long interview with one PhD working on an Ebola vaccine. We went to Holland, and we went to the Erasmus lab that's doing the gain of function on bird flu. We've had our Dr. Redfield, who used to run the CDC, say that's the next big one. You haven't seen nothing yet with Corona. This is going to be even bigger. And I met with several people, journalists who had done exploratory investigative journalism. One is Andere, Andere, Krant, Krant. That means newspaper in Dutch. It means another newspaper. And I met with 2 experts writing books on those labs. And so I've been really trying to meet with all these people, going to all these different U.S. military bases and so forth, and getting as much information as I can.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that they've talked about hemorrhagic fever being a possibility as well. And all these things that we're looking at are things that have been developed in bioweapons labs. I mean, even hemorrhagic fever, the way the strains that they're talking about had to be enhanced to jump from animals into humans, and it's part of the Ebola thing. Same thing with all the other stuff. Incidentally, I've got Dr. Artis going to be coming on with me next week. Actually, in about a week and a half, he's discovered that they've tied this in with snake venom. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and what you're doing is incredibly important because, when there's a lot of people, a lot of journalists involved in what you're doing, you're bound to be able to find some real pearls of wisdom in all that information that's out there. You mentioned to me that it wasn't your mainstream media group of journalists that you're seeing there in Krakow. Talk a little bit about the people who you are seeing there, and a lot of them are like you; they're citizen journalists.
Yeah, a lot of them work for relief agencies. They're finding homes for people and getting people out. I used to do this in Czechoslovakia with my father-in-law before the fall of the wall. So I very much respect what they're doing. So I might be the only one writing stories and so forth. But I think this is the launching point. This is sort of the last place you can be before you're in Ukraine, at least if you're going to come in from the Lviv side of things. So I'll probably get my bearings here for a day or so and then try to wheel my way in somewhere along the border. I'd like to go to, I think it's near Lviv, about 30 miles, Vizhnitsia, I think. It's the place that was bombed so heavily that was a NATO training base for and they're trying to bring the weapons in by train, Dan. And that in the age of satellites, that's I think they're trying to blow them up deliberately because it just doesn't make any sense to me. So I don't want to ride that train.
Lusitania. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah. It's like, we're going to bring over weapons. It's going to be on the ship named Lusitania. And then the Germans telegraph over, if you do that, we're going to sink you. Oh, that's okay. I don't think you'll sink us. So, so getting in is going to be a little tricky. I want to go in by car if that's a possibility. And, if worse comes to worse, I can take the train to the closest place and walk in, and then, take buses or whatever, and work my way in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you're only from Ukraine. You're what, probably 300-400 miles?
Oh no, I'm a lot closer than that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm about 30 or so.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, maybe less than that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that it was that close to the border.
Yeah. This is the last stop before home. When I got here, there was a refugee center, because this is really the first big city, as you get over the border. Mm-hmm. But there was a refugee center, not that overwhelmed. There was like 50 beds in there, and there was maybe 10 people, in the center. But they did have people walking people out to cars and getting them taxis and so forth, like guides and shepherds. They were kind of moving people through. And I saw a lot of whole families. I saw a lot of, men who probably were trying to avoid getting trapped in there. 48 million people in Ukraine. I don't know, it's the size of Texas, but I think it has like 3 times the population. But I saw an awfully lot of families trying to get out.
Wow. Well, I know for a fact that the situation in Ukraine has been exacerbated by the neo-Nazis, that a lot of the Ukrainian troops that are influenced by these groups have been killing their own people just to give the perception that the Russians are a lot more bloodthirsty than they really are. Have you encountered any of that in your experience? Have you talked to anyone that said that they've been fired on by their own people, or is there any evidence of that at all?
Not yet. I'm not in it, enough yet to. I'm not over the border yet. So I did I'm mainly talking to refugees right now, people that are kind of making their way out. And there was this one little girl that she was popping her head up and playing hide and seek with me on the train. She's a little 4-year-old, and I was going through all the words for, lion, tiger, elephant, giraffe, trying to make the noises and stuff. And, just having fun on the train, trying to kill time. And the mother could speak English. She was from Zaporizhia, I guess is what it's called. And she was translating for me and the little girl, and they were playing this game. But then the time came to leave and go back, and they had been at a relative's house for Easter. And they were a very religious family, and they were leaving the train, and the grandmother got up, and it was the grandmother of the son who's still back there. Mm-hmm. The son he's been in training. He hasn't been in a battle yet, but he's been in training with the army. I don't know how old he is. But then they started crying, and there was everything they could do to try to hide it from the little kid. It was really just one of the most gripping moments, and all three families are all kind of like, oh, we're back here. And I just said I would pray, for your family, and pray for your, this thing to end quickly. And hopefully these guys in Azovstal, these Nazis will surrender, and then it'll be over. Because I think that's really what Putin is trying to get at. And I really wish the Azov folks would just surrender and not make this something that's going to, because if they kill the people that are the NATO people, I think it could touch off World War III.
Oh yeah.
And I wrote the book a year ago before any of this stuff, and before any World War or anything in Ukraine. So it turned out to be kind of prophetic in that sense. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's always sad because they take the people who are really just victims, like you're talking about. These Ukrainian people that are good people, they're honest. They're the cannon fodder, but they always use them as a way to demonize the other side. And I think I see an awful lot of that happening. It's sad that we get led into some real messes. Of course, 9/11 comes to mind immediately when you hear of how a whole population of intelligent people can be led into something that's the diabolical opposite of what we should be doing.
Yeah,
that 9/11, that's a perfect example. Certainly the Lusitania, we talk about Wilson Rand saying, I'll keep us out of war. And meanwhile, he was playing everything he could. The Lusitania went down 3 years before the Americans entered the war, but he was playing everything he could to try to get to demonize the Germans. And he hired Sigmund Freud's nephew as his propaganda campaign minister. And that ultimately ended up creating a situation where we got into World War I. We don't need any more of this crap. We're intelligent human beings. We need to recognize the evil that's behind a lot of this stuff. That's why you're over there right now, is to try to identify a lot of that stuff. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing. I guess the image that they're trying to project, and what some of the just regular people on the street are trying to tell people.
Well, I think everything's blue and yellow here. I mean, there's every store selling blue and yellow everything. And as I've come closer and closer to the front line, it's gotten more and more, pro-Ukraine. A lot of the city halls that never flew flags are flying the Ukraine flags. In Germany, I was on the Arnhem where the Operation Market Garden was. on the Rhine there in Germany, and there's all these boats lined up, all these cruise boats where the Ukrainians are living, refugees are living. So I've mainly seen it through the refugees so far, but politically, I see Zelensky trying to make this into a little Ukraine against big Russia. Mm-hmm. And the big bear, and we're the similar propaganda in World War I was brave little Belgium, against Germany. And we should really help brave little Belgium. And that's how we got into the war, right? That's how England got into the war, brave little Belgium. And I don't know why NATO would have these people down there in this steel plant, this Azovstal steel plant. It doesn't make any sense other than they're sacrificial lambs to draw NATO into this thing. NATO seems to be itching for a fight, and they're using this little, brave little Ukraine, as you mentioned, propaganda, and that's not the case. And we have to be the ones that tell that you don't grow a conscience just when it's the facts are on your side. In the last 45 days, 8 years, we've had that cleansing and nobody said a thing. Now, all of a sudden, you grow a conscience, in the last 45 days. Well, I got something to tell you. If you want me to condemn Putin's actions, you have to first, to show me that you're impartial, you have to condemn the actions of the CIA for overthrowing Yanukovych in 2014, and you have to condemn the neo-Nazis that have been ethically cleansing it since then. If you don't think that that's been happening, you're not reading your own newspapers. The Washington Post, Time Magazine, all these people said Ukraine had a horrible neo-Nazi problem a year ago. But the neo-Nazi problem, poof, vanished as soon as Putin invaded Ukraine. So I just want to tell both sides of the story. That's all I want anybody to do. And let the chips fall where they may. I don't think Putin wants to overthrow Zelensky. I never said he did, and he never said he wanted to do that. He said he wanted to get rid of the neo-Nazi problem. And the biolabs, keeps coming up over and over. So I take him at his word, and he's produced the proof. I said he was going to have to produce the proof. He's produced the proof time and time again. Hunter Biden with the Metabiota laptops, Hunter Biden with Metabiota Blackberries, Hunter Biden with all the paperwork. It's Hunter Biden is sort of the Lee Harvey Oswald here, the Lee Harvey Biden, or the Lee Harvey Metabiota. This has been going on decades with the people at Burisma like Kofor Black, and they're just using him as the patsy in this.
Well, I know Juliet had talked about how they started that genocide against the Russian people starting in 2014. That's pretty commonly understood and known, and that over 100,000 Russians have been killed by the Ukrainian neo-Nazi groups. They've been bombarding parts of their own country. And we need to understand one thing. Isn't Ukraine still technically, legally part of the Russian Federation? Because the Russian Federation has been paying their debts, and they never legally separated from the Russian Federation. So this is like maybe California, and that'd be a good example. California has a guy like Gruesome Newsom that's a complete idiot and screwing up the country so bad. And maybe somebody in Arizona or New Mexico, well, not New Mexico, Arizona or Montana or somewhere else with a little bit of dignity might want to go in and say, hey, wait a minute, quit blowing the crap out of your own people. Isn't that kind of where we're at?
Yeah, I think there's, it goes back to Lenin originally. Took kind of like three groups, the Polish, Galicia, eastern part where I'm near, and then there was the part of the traditional Ukrainians, I guess, if you call it that, and then the Russians in the east. and kind of just said, okay, that's all going to be one thing. And that's always trouble when you put three ethnic groups together that have always hated each other, especially the Russians and the German contingent going head to head. So I think that was part of the built-in conflict of Ukraine from the very beginning in 1918. But with the fall of the Soviet Union, those old sectional rivalries were bound to resurface. And Donetsk is supposedly voting to become an independent state of some type. So that'll hopefully solve that question. Lugansk, I think, will follow suit. I think Putin wants a little bit more than that, though, because, they sunk one of his ships. And that means that the coastal area along the Black Sea there and the Sea of Azov is now a threatening area. And I think he's going to want a land bridge to his Navy base there in Crimea. So how this thing shakes out territorially is going to be an interesting thing for map designers going forward. I think he's going to want a buffer zone, though, after what happened with that ship, with the Moskva.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, the Russians, I read the article, the Russians said it was an ammunition explosion in the hold of the ship, and it looks more like it really was taken out by a couple of missiles that supersonic sea missiles that took it out. But the complexities to this whole process, and quite frankly, I think Putin is being pretty rational, surprisingly so, considering how much propaganda there is out there.
Yeah, I think if you look at the use of precision weapons, only precision weapons, you look at the use of allowing human corridors or humanitarian corridors that he's done. I think when you look at the very measured attacks, he basically took out the airfields so that there would be air dominance, but he didn't go, bomb everything into oblivion. His lack of targeting civilian targets, I think, is to be commended. Occasionally something gets, misses and a horrible tragedy happens, but then again, I don't trust these Azov guys with their own missiles, to shoot it into one of their buildings and film it and then say the Russians did it. The Russians have nothing to gain to hitting a civilian building unless a sniper's there.
Right.
They have nothing to gain of killing a family of four, with an errant missile. And I do see them backing away, like I said before, from Kiev and really concentrating on this Azovstal steel plant. So everything I've seen so far, the only thing I would like a little bit more, Dan, is a little bit more evidence. We've got a lot of paperwork of the bioweapons, a lot of paperwork, but I'd like to see some scientists testifying, and I'd like to see some vials where, a third party can test it.
Right. I would too. I'd like to, that's the thing that we really, really need here. And I was going to ask you about the pictures that we get of what's going on in Ukraine. They always try to make it look so tragic, and it's the nature of reporting, I guess, to try to make everything look as bad as they possibly can. But how can we explain some of these civilian targeted areas? Are they in fact being targeted by the Azov brigades that are out there trying to, I guess, stir the pot and make things look worse than it may be?
Well, we've been seeing this in Syria, and the same General Cloutier with NATO was in Syria, and the same General Cloutier was in Libya, where these false flags and dragging bodies in for the cameras and all that sort of thing, and the white helmets really being the bad guys and pretending like they're the good guys. We've seen this a lot before, the psychological warfare being given even more emphasis than the real war. And I think that what is different now is there's so many citizen journalists now and so many people taking pictures. These false narratives really are like paper mache in a rainstorm. They just don't hold up well. They hold up for about an hour and then everybody rips them apart and says, "Oh, here's the real thing." They're like the bodies at Bucha. They show the Russian soldiers, with the ropes pulling them. Well, after you do that, then nobody's ever going to believe another massacre thing again. They're going to think, okay, you wouldn't be doing that if you hadn't done it.
Right.
So I think the psychological warfare is something that they're going to have to get better at, or else I just don't think people are buying it anymore. There's some that do, CNN watchers that'll believe anything, but I think most impartial people are saying, come on.
Yeah, I think you're right. And America, I didn't say it, but America's getting pretty jaded. And that's good because, frankly, we've been lied to so much over the last, 30, 40, 50 years that it's high time that we start paying attention. But I think people are getting to the point now where they don't believe anything. And so they don't even believe the truth.
Right.
Right. And so that's why it's going to be so important to get backup documentation on all this stuff.
Yeah, this is a constant problem. I mean, I came out with a Biden BlackBerry 5 years ago. Everybody said I made it up. Then Bobby Linsky came out and said, "Oh, by the way, that's the BlackBerries." That was 2 years ago. Still had people saying I made it up. It's sort of like Hunter Biden laptop with JP Isaac. They attacked him, said he made it up, destroyed his business. And then, 3 years later, a year later, Washington Post says, "Oh, they were right."
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's too late, for the guy. His life's ruined, I think, 2 years ago. And my sort of thing with the Biden BlackBerry is similar sort of thing 5 years ago. We're talking about bioweapons and dark weapons. These BlackBerries were meant to be used for negotiations for energy deals like the Iran nuclear deal, are being repurposed for covert warfare.
Right.
And that's not good, especially when you start giving these things to ISIS, you start giving these things to Al-Qaeda, you start giving them to Al-Shabaab in Africa, or you start giving them to, various terrorist groups like the Iranian terrorist groups. How is that not a false flag? I mean, it's maybe not you giving them directions on what to blow up, but you're giving them protection when you give them an encrypted BlackBerry. So
well, and we saw that with Hillary Clinton. I have to tell you, though, George, that was 3 years ago, I think, that you came on and did that program with me on the BlackBerries Matter. We got over 1 million views on that particular podcast just because it really took off. I mean, I got so many comments on that show. So obviously people are starting to pay attention. And when you look at how they've used technology to move us in directions that we shouldn't be moving, and certainly now the bioweapons labs that are being exposed, this is going to be a big deal because Dr. Paul Craig Roberts came on my program, I think it was about 6 years ago, talking about the genetic specific bioweapons that were being targeted against the Russian people by DARPA and by DOD. And I mean, you don't do that kind of nonsense unless you want to try to get into a world war. That is where we're at right now, isn't it?
Yeah, I went to the Armed Services Blood Program. I followed the 30th Medical Wing. I went to the 30th Medical Wing. There's one in Kaiserslautern. There's another one over in Spangdahlem. I've been following NATO in the 30th Medical Wing doing this kind of blood. They do great stuff too. They do blood transfusions for soldiers and so forth. So there's always a layer, a little thread that you got to get in there and figure it out. What's actually the covert part We had the 59th Medical Wing in Fort Hood also involved in this blood doping type of thing.
Just to give them a break for just a moment, here is the ad that Dan just mentioned. U.S. Air Force posts ad for biosamples from white Russians, and this was in July 2017 that they were asking for these 7 samples. And I'll read this here real quick before we get back to the video. New types of biological weapons are being developed. Most likely they are weaponized viruses, said the former UN Bioweapons Commission member. The U.S. Air Force Air Education and Training Command posted an advertisement seeking samples of ribonucleic acid, RNA, and synovial fluid from white Russians. The advertisement was seen on the Federal Business Opportunities government website, which is used to place tenders. The most distinctly asked for at least 12 RNA samples as well as 27 samples of synovial fluid from Russian people of European ancestry, according to an RT report. And here is the actual ad from the website. U.S. Air Force synovial tissue RNA samples. And at the bottom here, you can see all samples, synovial tissue, and RNA samples shall be collected from Russia and must be Caucasian. The government will not consider tissue samples from Ukraine. So you can't even be like a Russian that just like recently moved to Ukraine. All normal human fresh frozen synovial tissue and normal human and RNA samples must be Russian and of Caucasian origin. All FF synovial tissue and RNA, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I just got into it. But, they get into the sex, age, body mass index. That must accompany all the samples. And it says new types of biological weapons are being developed. There's nothing else that could possibly interest the military department. Most likely, they are weaponized viruses, Nicholin shared with RT. The U.S. is trying to develop various types of biological weapons specifically for specific carriers of this gene pool, and Caucasoids are needed since they constitute the majority of the population of our country. This is the same focus group for which they are trying to find the samples. It's necessary for the viruses to act selectively on one or another ethnic group. Igor Nicholin, who is also a military expert, theorized in a report published by Pravda in 2016 that the United States may have harmed late Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez. It is not only Hugo Chavez who died because of cancer, but also many other Latin American leaders and at quite a young age. The Americans have corresponding elaborations. They significantly outperform other countries in virology and nanotechnologies. Chavez has probably poisoned at the UN headquarters during the General Assembly in New York. If it had been a unique case, one could have said that it's an accident. 2 cases is a coincidence. 3 cases is a regularity. But Professor Konstantin Severinov from Rutgers University expressed to the news agency that the more you know about the genetic diversity of people, the more opportunities you have, in particular, to treat and diagnose diseases. RNA is found in all living cells and is needed to translate genetic information into proteins. All people are different from one another. That is the genetic background, and the reasons why genetic differences are responsible for some other differences between people are still not understood and are subject to active study. So, yeah, he's saying it's for active study. They're trying to create vaccines. But the Russian guy, he's saying it's a bioweapon. A weaponized bioweapon. Do I have another article I was going to read? Okay. Oh, yeah, I do have one before we get back to George. I'm seeing if Rita will get here. She may get here. She may not get here. So the U.S. Department of Defense awarded a contract for COVID-19 research in Ukraine 3 months before COVID was known to even exist. And this was an article by the Expose on April 13th, 2022. The world first started to hear about a novel. Oh, I'm not getting into all that. But anyway, there's the lab within Ukraine is called Labyrinth. And here you see within the Black and Veatch, we've been into the us.gov spending.gov website before at neighborhoodnewsstudio.com. And through the Black and Veatch contract, there's subcontracts that they hand out to other companies. Oh, Rita's here. There's subcontracts they hand out to other companies. And this one is Labyrinth Global Health, and it's based out of Ukraine. And you can see here that they're 3 months before the COVID outbreak. I guess they put the COVID outbreak in 2020 in the United States because this award was awarded on November 12th, 2019. We here at Neighborhood News Studio think the COVID outbreak was spread at the SISM Games in September 2019. But SME manuscript documentation and COVID-19 research. So that was at the lab in the Ukraine getting the COVID-19 research funding as a subcontract through Black and Veatch. The federal government has spent $3.63 trillion in response to COVID-19. And here's some more. You can view the awards as you go on. But we're going to get back to George. I just wanted to kind of showcase you some of the damning evidence that they were talking about. They were chatting about the synovial, RNA synovial tissue. So I brought that up, showed you the actual documentation. They were talking about the biolabs in Ukraine. And now you know that the biolabs in Ukraine got awarded money through Black and Veatch to do COVID-19 research 3 months before the outbreak happened in the United States. So getting back to George's video, we do have Rita Adler in the studio, ladies and gentlemen. After George's, we're going to play a little bit more of this video here with Dan Halpel and George Webb. And then Rita Adler is going to make her first appearance at neighborhoodnewsstudio.com. I'm excited.
Come on, man.
Oh, Joe Biden. I don't know if he's excited.
Give me a little break here.
We're not going to give you a break, Joe. Not here. Not at Neighborhood News Studio. So we're going to play the Dan Halpel video a little bit. We're going to continue that just after this break.
Blood samples, and that seemed to be diverting the blood samples of the Russians and the Eastern Europeans to nefarious purposes. You cannot believe that people would be doing genetic targeting based on blood, but they did it in South Africa for the black bomb. They called it Wouter Basson, did it for the black bomb. A guy by the name of Avi Braverman, we talked about this for 6 years too, in Palestine, Jews versus Palestinians. And now here we are in Eastern Europe with this real blood program. It's a real thing. And it just sounds so crazy, but then the documentation, the Russian Ministry of Defense put it out. And now the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying there's more coming through whistleblowers and so forth. They have enough already. They don't need any more. So they're not putting more weight and value on the hostages that Azovstal. They're saying, hey, we got everything we need. So we're going to go ahead and close off the exits. So you can leave anytime, but we're going to close off the exits one by one until the last one's closed. So you make a decision. But this blood targeting is a real thing. I couldn't believe it, Dan, unless I had done all the legwork and gone to all these different places. And it's a real thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what Dr. Roberts said. And Juliet said she testified before the UN in 1995. She actually went to the UN because they were digging up graves. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, they were going around digging up graves in all these different ethnic groups if they didn't volunteer to give their DNA in person. And so this is pretty awful stuff. You know, what we're talking now about these hemorrhagic fever and some of the other things, the Ebola spinoffs, this is something that's directly attributed to this sort of bioengineering, isn't it?
Yeah, if you look at some of this, one of the gals I interviewed for a long time at Marburg Institute, you know, she was working on vaccines for Ebola. And I said, you know, I was just checking my knowledge with her and just saying, hey, you know, the Ebola gets inside the actual T cell, which is like sort of wearing a police uniform and mixing in with the police. You know, it's like those are the things that you depend on for your immune system. You'll get the invader. But the Ebola sneaks in and wears the police uniform and looks like another regular T cell. And that's sort of a signature of potential weaponization of a thing that was working with animals. But then you put a human envelope on it, an envelope that you know infects humans, and then you target something that you know humans humans need in order to fight outside invaders, and you directly target it into T cells, and that's the HIV spike. You know, and that same HIV spike, the glycoprotein 120 is what it's called, and glycoprotein 41, that's in the coronavirus. Now, how did that get in there? Mm-hmm. You know, so those are the telltales. This furin cleavage site, which divides those two proteins more quickly, is also there, which is a telltale smoking gun. Dr. Artis talks about how that furin cleavage site can be used for snake venom. Other people have talked how it can be used for rabies. Other people have talked about how that could be used for HIV. It's an opportunistic cleft, sort of like a castle with an open breach in it, mm-hmm. and that anything can be now thrown into that. And it's a telltale sign of a bioagent.
Mm-hmm. And it's also a telltale sign of the enhancement that can only happen on purpose. It can't happen accidentally. This is just not something in nature. This is weaponizing the disease or a parasite or whatever it is, so that they can use it against the human race.
Yeah, it's really, you look at Congo, Crimea hemorrhagic fever, it looks a lot like the coronavirus with the spikes, you know, like a little fur ball, a little Velcro ball with the little spikes on it. The same thing the flu looks like, with a little hemagglutinin spikes. And this is why I think, well, first of all, we know there's a chimera. We know that it's not natural. When they said it came from bats, well, if you do the genetic analysis, there's like 6 different bats from all different parts of China in this thing. There's pangolin in this thing. Now they've discovered, I was going up to Poznan here in Poland. They've discovered a hedgehog, which is a little rat-like thing here in Central Europe. Now, there's no way, I mean, I hate to use the word, you know, crazy zoonotic animal sex party, but it would have had to have been one hell of a party. And how would you even get the invitations out to get everybody at the one spot? You know, there's just no way that could happen. It's a chimera. And what I'm afraid of, Dan, is that we think we've been told that it's just a corona spike, but I think there could be another spike, a flu spike, this more serious flu spike. Mm-hmm. And that would be the way of You notice how our flu were way up here and then went to zero, and then our corona went like this.
Right.
I wonder if they're,
Yeah, and in fact, every other disease that had been killing people just disappeared, and everything became coronavirus.
Plus, we started paying the hospitals to, and all that. So, and then remdesivir, paying people to prescribe remdesivir. And if you pay people enough, and the people on high at the hospital says you will prescribe that or nothing else, then there's no choice. So, and it doesn't work. It makes hospital stays actually longer. I mean, if you take a sample group, which is the original sample group, and then 15 days stay in the hospital, and you take all the people that were more than 15 days and you self-select them out, and so you're only left with people 12 days and less, that's what happened, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's how they said it reduces hospital stays by 3 days. Well, you game the system to say it's 3 days. Now they've thrown it out and say that remdesivir doesn't work, but it's still being prescribed to this day 2 years later. Doesn't work.
Yeah, well, and not only does it not work, it's actually deadly to people that have kidney disease or people who are diabetic. I mean, it's just as deadly as it could be. And in fact, when they did the animal experiments with it, they had a 40% death rate from animals that were where they targeted remdesivir as a prescription or a test drug on animals. 40% of them died.
Yeah. Usually they turn down the volume a little bit after something that horrible happens, but which they probably did, because that's just a shocking fatality rate of when you for your animal tests. But I did have a chance to do a little bit of that in my computer business, is recruit panels for drug trials and so forth. And everything that normally has done, normally with phase 1A testing, B testing, and then phase 1, 2, and 3 was completely, that normally takes 10 years, was completely circumvented, completely end around with this emergency authorization. Nothing, none of the liabilities that would normally come with it, nothing. Just ramrodded through. And it was just like a bunch of military guys just made an order and said, this is the way it's going to be. And now they want the WHO to have this worldwide authority. And in order to get, a part of the worldwide financial system, et cetera, you have to succumb and submit to the WHO's medical authority. Well, that's just may as well give up the ghost right there. Forget the Constitution at that point. So there you go. Yeah,
exactly. Well, your book, World War DARPA, you did a fabulous job of kind of connecting the dots from beginning to end, and talking about how, the whole coronavirus thing tied in so well with everything that had been developed by DARPA. Maybe give our listeners a little bit of a background on DARPA, on DOD, how that organization really got started, and some of the things that they've been involved in, some of the programs that are proven that they were actually involved in.
Well, yeah, it's really two things. I was muted myself there. Sorry. I was involved in the computer industry right from the early get-go, and there was this thing called ARPANET, which was a public thing that was in California. Universities in California started it, where everybody first got an email, and it was an EDU email. And it was before websites.com and all that. And that was run publicly by universities and so forth to share data amongst these national laboratories usually, but then everybody started using it for email. So that was ARPA. Well, then DOD said, okay, all you California professors, now you all got to come to Fort Meade in Maryland, and we're going to call it Defense Advanced Research Projects. Well, there's another thread. So when DARPA talks about themselves, they always bring in the history of computers and, hey, we brought you the internet. Don't you like the internet? Don't you like to be able to Google things? Don't you like the GPS? Don't you like all this stuff? Don't you like your Facebook, etc.? So that's DARPA's PR plan. But if you follow the weapons side of DARPA, it really goes back to the Vietnam War, where they were trying to do things like the electronic fence, smart dust or smart crickets that would basically send out an electronic signal if there was Viet Cong, walking. All kinds of bioweapon they inherited. And a lot of these scientists, again, they were hiring from originally the old German paperclip scientists and then the Russian scientists after the fall of the Soviet Union. So it's been all these advanced drones, these silent motorcycles, the silent cars, the silent this, silent that, stealth this, stealth that, poisons galore. You just can't. They've had really no check on them. There's really no oversight of DARPA. So it's just kind of like a devil's workshop run amok. And that's really, when you get into designing pandemic type things, the force multiplication goes way up. I mean, if you shoot one person with a dart, with a Colby dart gun, that kills that one person. But if it doesn't start affecting everybody in the room and then everybody dies, that's where you cross the threshold with DARPA with these pandemic things, where you keep creating these genies that can't be let out of the bottle. But oops, we seem to have these guys that are always letting them out of the bottle. And that's really what World War DARPA is about. It's really saying that DARPA crossed a line in improving intelligence and so forth that was provided, or the technology for surveillance and identification, find and fix and finish for traditional warfare. And they crossed the line into this bio agent pandemic thing. And that is one of those things where it could be the last war, because even once they start it, they can't stop it. Unlike nuclear missiles, you can say, hey, wait a minute, you just blew up New York, you just blew up Moscow. Do we really want to do this thing? Mm-hmm. You don't get that option in biowarfare. It runs amok. So that's why I wrote World War DARPA. It's sort of like the plot of Dr. Strangelove with nuclear missiles, which imagined a doomsday machine. Once one person fired one, and I see your background is kind of like that, then they have to fire them all. That's not true, actually, with nukes, but it is true with bios, unfortunately. And that's the point of World War DARPA.
Well, and, what we're talking to, the biological.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Dan Happel at danhappel.com. And for hosting George Webb and letting him really just kind of break down the whole Ukrainian-Russian conflict at a very basic level. We here at neighborhoodnewsstudio.com, we're kind of rush into things because our audience has been engaged with us for so long. So when George goes to these new places, he has to slow down and he has to really break it down for the audience. And it is, and that was a great show. Just highlighting some of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict and what's going on with the biolabs. But without further ado, we have a very, make sure you're talking to that mic, very, very special guest tonight, I guess you could say. Aaron's the one that should be doing this because this is his lovely, beautiful wife. You have 4 children, right?
Yes,
4 children. Wow. Motherhood. You're a student too, right?
Yes, I am.
4 children. She's a student. And she has to live with Aaron. I mean, her name is Rita Adler. Rita, thank you for joining us at Neighborhood.
And today is our 13th anniversary.
Oh, today's your anniversary.
Yeah.
Can you talk in the microphone a little bit more? Say that again.
I said today is our 13th anniversary.
Today is your 13th anniversary. That is love. Such a wonderful thing. Hit that top right button. Top right one. It's Joe Biden going, come on, man. So Rita, we've been, Aaron kind of wanted you to come on the show today to highlight a couple of specific things. So we've been doing a lot of research here at neighborhoodnewsstudio.com with Mark Kulacz and George Webb into some of the spread of these viruses, and specifically the viruses that spread in Africa. There's this whole zoonosis theory where the diseases, they start in the wild with gorillas, with bats, with civets, with some type of mammal in the wild. And with either they're hunted or they're found for scrap meat or the other, but a human comes along, finds this infected corpse or kills the gorilla with Ebola, and they end up consuming the meat. And they're saying because of this, this is how all the viruses have spread. You've heard of HIV and how that spread from bushmeat. And Aaron wanted you to come on and kind of highlight like how you're from Ghana, Africa.
Yes.
And I wanted you to highlight how it's common where you're from for people to
Eat bushmeat.
eat bushmeat.
We enjoy it. We just don't eat it.
You enjoy it?
Yeah.
So it's very common over in Ghana to go out hunt and find and kill for your own food, right?
Yep.
I mean, we do that here in the United States, but it's like we shoot deer and some pheasants and bird. Yeah, wild turkey, but we like limit ourselves to certain animals. And we've seen pictures of like the apes in the jungles of Africa, and people carrying out apes, and they're selling them on the side of the road. Aaron also said that like as you drive by in a car, people will be like selling bushmeat on the side of the road. Is that true?
Yeah, and they'll be holding it and they'll be selling it to people. Yeah.
Have you ever sold bushmeat?
I have bought some. I haven't sold
Oh,
some.
you have bought bushmeat and eaten some yourself.
Yeah.
What's your favorite?
Rats.
I'm guessing I like when you said rat, I picture like a big old slimy like New York City subway rat, but I guess if it's out in the wild and it's eating some more natural resources.
They are big and fat and healthy.
Mm-hmm. So when you cook this, you cook this bushmeat, right?
Right.
You don't just like find a rat and start eating it.
No, it goes through cooking before so the temperature kill all the viruses or bacteria in it.
Well, they say out like most hunters, if you watch like the survival shows, they say if you like even if you kill a squirrel with a rock or a little slingshot or something, that the meat tastes best when it's charred, like when it's overcooked.
Oh, wow.
And that's easily the best way to kill all the pathogens in the meat.
Mhm.
How often do you guys have like virus outbreaks have you ever heard of a virus outbreak or bacterial outbreak from bushmeat from where you're from?
No, I was born and raised there, and I have eat bush meat from my childhood. So maybe, let's say
Talking to the mic.
I was born and raised from Ghana, and I have eat bush meat from my childhood till now, and I haven't got any virus. So I don't know what people are talking about.
Yeah, I know. And you still go to the stores now. You actually have a very healthy diet. You eat the rice, you eat you eat like lamb and stuff in the store. You have a special store you go, like Ghanaian store that you go to in America, right?
Yeah, I do.
And it is weird that Aaron wanted you on to exclusively talk about bushmeat.
Just last summer, even there was a groundhog in my yard. I killed it and I ate it.
Wait a second. This may have just been the greatest moment on neighborhoodnewsstudio.com.
I still have some in my freezer if you want some.
Oh, so did Aaron eat some of this?
No, I don't think he knows about
So
it.
you killed a groundhog in your backyard, skinned it, gutted it,
Yep.
You're more man than I am, Rita. Skinned it, gutted it, cooked it, and ate it.
Yep. I made good soup out of it.
You made some good soup. So
Yeah.
when you take that out of the freezer and you cook some of it up, you let me know. I'll come over and try it out.
Okay.
What happened to those chickens that you guys were raising?
I guess we couldn't raise it in our community, so we got rid of it.
You had to get rid of the chickens.
Yeah.
So back home in Ghana, Africa, I was kind of just chatting with you a little bit before the show. Just like, how was the epidemic over in Ghana, Africa? Like over here, there's like a mass panic. We shut the world down and kind of closed up shop for weeks, months on end. We shut down schools. We weren't allowed to go to churches and gather for the holidays. Was there the same kind of rhetoric going on in Ghana? What was it like over there? Just talking to your family and friends back home.
I think we didn't get a lot of hate as we did here in America here. But there was a panic because they were watching foreign news and they saw what was going on in the foreign countries. So there was a lot of panic, but we didn't get much coronavirus outbreak there.
So so you're saying there's no like all the numbers? Would you say like just the amount of people getting sick over here compared to Ghana? Just going by hearsay, nothing like just less people.
Yeah, just
sick back home.
Yeah, less people.
Maybe that's because you guys do eat bushmeat back home. You guys have
because we are eating the
system.
healthy stuff. Yeah.
So, so what do the people back home think about America in general with the whole election with the Trump and Biden cycle? Do they even care about the politics back here, or is that just us just caring way too much that the U.S. is number one on the world stage?
We do care about politics because if anything affects here, it affects us because most of our things are shipped back there in Ghana. So yeah, we do care about politics and everything.
Is there did anyone in your family get sick?
No.
Back home?
No, none of my friends, none of my family members, none of anybody that I know there. No.
And you're the Ashanti tribe, right?
Yes.
Can you explain to our audience the difference in the tribes in Africa?
We have a lot. It's a small country, but we have more than 34 tribes.
Ghana, not Africa.
Yeah, in Ghana.
Yeah. So you have 34 different tribes in Ghana alone.
Yeah.
And your family was like the head of your village, right?
Well, okay. So, yeah, my dad is the chief.
Dad's the chief.
Yeah, so I'm kind of a princess.
No. She's a princess that kills, skins, and guts hedgehogs, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't kill it. People kill it, and I buy them.
So you're a princess back home.
Yeah, my dad is the chief in our town.
So when you go back home, you're used to like people throwing rose petals down wherever you walk, and you get free meals wherever you go, and it's like Princess Rita's here, and there's like paparazzi and all this stuff, right?
No, it doesn't happen like that. I know people respect me for being the princess, but it doesn't mean they have to be throwing things on the ground for me to walk on. No.
So when Aaron was over in Ghana, did he go straight for the princess, or did he try to work his way up the ladder?
No, when I met Aaron, he didn't know I was from a comfortable family. He didn't know that.
You were a teacher.
Yeah, I was a teacher. He met me in my classroom, not in my house. So yeah.
Yeah, he saw the work you were doing, and you guys started a nonprofit called Teach on the Beach, which still is open to this day.
Yep.
And how often do you speak to the people running Teach? I know Aaron talks to them regularly.
Even today, I talked to one of the kids.
Are the kids still learning, still developing over there?
They are doing great job there.
That's good. Well, we're wrapping it up here in 2 seconds. We're telling you get back to the viruses. We're closing. I just want the audience to know who Rita is. It's her 13th anniversary with Aaron. So everyone give the Adlers a round of applause. Rita has meant a lot to us here at Neighborhood News Studio. She's stuck with us, stuck with Aaron, and backed him up fully. And you've been doing a lot yourself at home as a student, as a mother. So keep up the hard work yourself. You're living the American dream, and that's what we want to continue here in America. We want that American dream to stay alive, and that's what we're fighting for here at Neighborhood News Studio. And the Adlers are the epitome of that. You guys work hard, stick together as a family. You're active in the community, you participate in the community, and you're trying to make a difference on a global scale. And congratulations to 13 years. and hopefully as the kids grow older and when they're in school, we'll have you come around and participate in some more shows so the audience gets to know you a little bit more, Rita.
Okay.
That sounds good. I know you wanted to do some African drum lessons here in the office at some point, or some like dance lesson. Rita likes to dance. She was a sprinter too. She's an athlete. Maybe we'll have to do a video, maybe after this. Andy and Rita, 40-yard dash in the parking lot.
Oh, you're gonna
Who do you guys think would win? Me, the big guy? Or I'm guessing you would win. I'm slow off the line, Rita. But thank you for coming on. And
But before she goes, I have one question.
Okay.
How did most people in Ghana or in your village, how did they handle COVID? Was it as bad as here in Michigan?
No, not even close. Not a lot of people got it. It was just a few people getting it in Ghana.
And do they believe in the zoonotic hypothesis that it came from bats and pangolins, or do they think it was a laboratory?
To be honest, we all don't know where it came from, and I don't want to suggest where it came from for other people. We all have our opinion. So
when in doubt, blame Aaron. That's what we do.
That's what we do.
That's what we do here at Neighborhood News
But it would be
Studio.
kind of hard to pin that one on Aaron. That'd be big.
The whole spread of COVID in Ghana. When in doubt, blame Aaron.
Yeah. If Aaron have gone there, then we would say Aaron brought it. But
Well, I'm going to blame the spread of COVID in Michigan on that groundhog in the other freezer.
If you ask majority, they will say maybe from the lab, but we all don't know.
Well, make sure you tell your friends back home in Ghana, Africa, that you are on neighborhoodnewsstudio.com. And you're famous here, too. You're not just a princess in Ghana. You're a princess in Temperance. All right, everyone. Have a good day. We got a great schedule for you guys tomorrow with John OLoughlin kicking us off. We got George Webb. He might be moving into Ukraine. I know he's in Poland right now, but he might be moving even further towards the Ukraine and the battle zones. We have Mark Kulacz replay at 2 p.m. after that. Then our 4 p.m. is Chris Hunter, correct? Chris Hunter on with Dr. Bose. Make sure you tune in at 4 p.m. And then we have Peter Duke at 5 p.m. with the Duke Report. All available on neighborhoodnewsstudio.com.